Mechanisms. This transformation creates actual security capabilities that address critical threats while establishing the credible deterrence necessary for stabilizing the Muslim world's security environment. Pakistan's leadership of this process would draw on its unique qualifications spanning command system development, secure communication experience, management, force intelligence certification cooperation methodologies, sophisticated nuclear deterrence approaches. And the implementation would balance Islamic principles regarding strength preparation and just defense with modern military requirements for effective multinational operations, creating security capabilities that address contemporary challenges while maintaining authentic Islamic character. The initial operating capability directly addresses several critical security challenges facing the Muslim world. By establishing functional command and control systems connected through secure networks, the architecture counters external military interventions that previously exploited fragmentation among Muslim states. Through deploying certified rapid reaction forces, the framework provides immediate capabilities for critical infrastructure and sacred site protection. By implementing intelligence sharing systems, the alliance addresses information gaps that created vulnerability to surprise action against Muslim interests. Most fundamentally, the initial operating capability development converts alliance commitments from diplomatic declarations to actual security capabilities that potential adversaries must consider in their calculations. The resulting deterrent effect implements the Quranic wisdom regarding preparation as prerequisite for both peace and security through strength. By establishing Pakistan's central role in these capabilities, particularly regarding nuclear deterrence extension, the process institutionalizes the natural leadership qualification demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis when Pakistan's sophisticated military capabilities provided credible defense despite resource constraints. The initial operating capability established by 2028 would provide the foundation for subsequent capability expansion as detailed in the following chapters. This foundation, balancing ambitious security enhancement with realistic implementation constraints, would enable the Muslim world to exercise defensive capabilities commensurate with its size and importance rather than accepting vulnerable fragmentation. Through this capability development process, Pakistan would fulfill its historic role as the guardian that provides the nuclear umbrella and conventional capabilities necessary for collective Muslim world security in an increasingly challenging international environment. Chapter 77. Force Integration. Process. And hold firmly to the rope of Allah altogether and do not become divided. And remember the favor of Allah upon you when you were enemies, and He brought your hearts together and you became, by His favor, brothers. Quran 3-103, with command structures established and initial operating capabilities activated, the Muslim security architecture reaches the critical force integration phase. This process transforms nominally allied but operationally separate national military elements into a genuinely integrated security force capable of unified action under alliance command. The Quranic injunction to hold firmly together and not become divided provides both spiritual guidance and practical wisdom. Effective collective security requires not merely parallel forces but integrated capabilities operating cohesively toward common objectives. This chapter examines how Pakistan would lead the force integration process, applying both Islamic principles of brotherhood in action and modern military integration methodologies to create unified capabilities that transcend the limitations of individual national forces while respecting sovereign identities. National Forces Designation for Alliance. Roles. The foundation of force integration begins with the systematic designation of specific national forces for alliance roles, creating clear understanding of which capabilities fall under alliance purview and under what conditions. Force Contribution Framework Implementation. The alliance would implement a sophisticated framework governing how member states designate forces for collective security operations. 1. Tiered commitment system. A graduated commitment structure would be established with different obligation levels ranging from fully committed forces permanently assigned to alliance command to contingency forces available only under specific conditions. This flexible system draws on Pakistan's experience managing varied commitment levels in different security partnerships while reflecting Islamic principles of proportional responsibility based on capability. 2. Capability-based designation approach. Rather than arbitrary numerical requirements, force designation would follow capability-based methodology where members contribute according to their specific strengths and specializations. This approach reflects Pakistan's military tradition of focusing on quality capabilities in domains of comparative advantage rather than attempting equal development across all areas despite resource constraints. 3. Islamic Specialty Force Identification. Unique to this alliance, specialized units with particular Islamic significance would receive formal designation, including forces specially trained for sacred site protection, pilgrimage security, and Islamic cultural heritage preservation. This designation reflects the alliance's distinctive religious identity while addressing security concerns of particular emotional resonance across the Muslim world. For Technical Enabler Contribution System, beyond combat forces, a systematic approach would designate critical technical enablers including intelligence capabilities, logistics support, cyber expertise, and specialized equipment. This system recognizes how these force multipliers often prove more valuable than additional combat units, reflecting Pakistan's sophisticated understanding of modern warfare requirements demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis. 5. Multinational formation development. Selected fully integrated multinational formations would be developed where personnel from multiple nations combine within single units rather than merely coordinating separate national formations. These integrated units draw on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for United Nations operations while creating force elements with particular symbolic significance for alliance unity. This force contribution framework establishes clear understanding of what capabilities members actually commit to alliance operations, creating realistic planning baseline rather than aspirational force lists that might not materialize during crisis. The implementation draws on Pakistan's pragmatic military culture emphasizing honest capability assessment as foundation for effective planning rather than exaggerated commitments that create false confidence in collective capabilities. Specific role specialization. Beyond general contribution frameworks, the alliance would develop a sophisticated approach to role specialization aligning national capabilities with functional requirements. 1. Comparative advantage assessment. Systematic analysis would identify specific national strengths across member states, including distinctive capabilities, geographical advantages, historical expertise, and specialized equipment. This assessment draws on Pakistan's experience developing specialized military capabilities that maximize effectiveness despite resource constraints, focusing development on areas of natural advantage. 2. Regional security role distribution. Geographic proximity would inform role assignments for territorial defense, border security, and regional stabilization operations, with members focusing on their immediate regions while maintaining broader alliance commitments. This approach reflects Pakistan's experience developing localized expertise in different border regions while maintaining broader national security capabilities. 3. Niche capability development coordination. Member states would receive support developing specialized capabilities addressing specific alliance requirements, including technical expertise, equipment access, and training assistance. This coordination draws on Pakistan's experience developing niche capabilities including counterterrorism expertise, special operations forces, and missile technologies despite resource constraints. 4. Islamic heritage security specialization. Recognizing the alliance's distinctive identity, specialized capabilities would be developed for protecting Islamic heritage sites, supporting Hajj security operations, and preserving threatened cultural artifacts. These specialized roles reflect religious obligations while addressing security concerns of particular significance across the Muslim world. 5. Technological domain distribution. Responsibility for critical technological domains including cyber operations, electronic warfare, and space-based capabilities would be distributed according to existing national expertise and development potential. This distribution draws on Pakistan's experience developing advanced technological capabilities in selected domains despite economic constraints, focusing resources on strategically significant areas. This role specialization approach creates complementary capabilities across the alliance rather than redundant force structures attempting identical development across all members regardless of comparative advantage. The implementation reflects Pakistan's strategic approach, developing specialized excellence in critical domains rather than attempting comprehensive capabilities beyond resource capacity, a model particularly appropriate for an alliance comprising nations with diverse economic and technological development levels. Readiness Management System. Designated forces require sophisticated readiness management, ensuring availability when needed while balancing resource constraints against preparedness requirements. 1. Graduated readiness level structure. A tiered readiness system would establish different response timelines for different force elements, ranging from hours for critical quick reaction units to months for general reinforcement capabilities. This graduated approach reflects Pakistan's military experience managing readiness levels according to threat assessment and resource availability rather than maintaining universal high readiness regardless of requirement. 2. Certification and validation process. Designated forces would undergo standardized certification processes verifying actual rather than merely declared capabilities, with multinational evaluation teams assessing readiness against established standards. This rigorous approach draws on Pakistan's experience with similar United Nations certification requirements, focusing on demonstrated capability rather than administrative declarations. 3. Rotation system implementation for high readiness. Force elements requiring sustained preparedness, a systematic rotation would distribute burden across multiple units and member states rather than maintaining the same forces at maximum readiness indefinitely. This sustainable approach reflects Pakistan's experience managing similar readiness rotations for its own forces despite resource constraints. 4. Exercise integration requirement. Designated forces would participate in regular alliance exercises demonstrating interoperability while building familiarity with multinational operation requirements. This practical approach reflects Pakistan's emphasis on realistic training as prerequisite for effective operations, particularly in multinational contexts where procedural familiarity proves as important as technical capability. 5. Islamic emergency mobilization procedures. Unique to this alliance, specialized procedures would enable rapid mobilization under emergency conditions, incorporating religious authority certification, expedited political approval processes, and spiritual preparation alongside material readiness. These procedures demonstrate how Islamic principles enhance rather than constrain military effectiveness by providing clear moral foundation and spiritual motivation. This readiness management system establishes realistic expectations regarding force availability during contingencies while implementing sustainable approaches balancing preparedness against resource constraints. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience managing similar challenges within its own forces, where maximizing return on limited resources requires sophisticated readiness management rather than universal high preparedness regardless of priority or likelihood. Interoperability standards implementation. Effective multinational operations require forces capable of working together cohesively despite different equipment, doctrines, and procedures. The alliance would implement comprehensive interoperability standards enabling effective integration while acknowledging realistic constraints. Technical interoperability development. The foundation of force integration lies in technical compatibility enabling basic combined operations despite equipment diversity. 1. Minimum essential interoperability standards. Critical. Rather than attempting comprehensive standardization, the alliance would establish minimum essential standards focusing on functions including identification systems, emergency communications, and basic tactical coordination. This pragmatic approach reflects Pakistan's experience achieving effective multinational operations without requiring uniform equipment or comprehensive standardization. 2. Interface system development. Where direct interoperability between national systems proves impractical, specialized interface systems would provide translation between different equipment types, communication protocols, and data formats. This approach draws on Pakistan's experience integrating diverse equipment types within its own forces, including Chinese, Western, and indigenous systems requiring similar interface solutions. 3. Common operating picture integration. Critical interoperability standards would focus on creating shared situational awareness through compatible data formats, reference systems, and information exchange protocols. This prioritization reflects Pakistan's operational experience, where shared understanding often proves more decisive than physical compatibility for multinational effectiveness. For identification friend or foe standardization, preventing fratricidal engagements requires standardized identification systems across all alliance air, ground, and naval elements regardless of other equipment differences. This critical requirement draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar systems for its own joint operations, where reliable identification directly impacts operational effectiveness. 5. Technical language standardization. Beyond physical systems, standardized technical terminology would be established for understanding critical across functions, linguistic ensuring differences. This standardization draws on Pakistan's experience operating in multilingual environments where terminology precision directly impacts operational safety and effectiveness. This technical interoperability development represents realistic near-term integration reflecting the alliance's diverse equipment heritage rather than attempting immediate standardization that would prove financially and logistically impractical. The implementation draws on Pakistan's pragmatic military culture, emphasizing practical effectiveness over theoretical perfection, creating capabilities that enable meaningful cooperation despite technical challenges. Procedural standardization implementation. Beyond technical systems, effective integration requires standardized procedures enabling consistent operations across diverse forces. 1. Tiered procedural framework, rather than attempting comprehensive standardization across all procedures. A tiered approach would establish mandatory standardization for critical procedures while allowing national approaches for less critical functions. This pragmatic approach reflects Pakistan's experience in multinational operations, where focused standardization of essential procedures proves more effective than attempting comprehensive uniformity. 2. Common tactical procedure development. Standard operating procedures would be established for common tactical situations, including convoy operations, checkpoint establishment, cordon and search activities, and other frequently conducted multinational tasks. These procedures draw on Pakistan's extensive experience in both United Nations operations and counterterrorism activities, where procedural clarity directly impacts multinational effectiveness. 3. Planning methodology standardization. Common planning processes would be established, ensuring consistent approach to operation design, execution, and assessment regardless of which member states participate. This standardization draws on Pakistan's military planning methodology developed through decades of operational experience and adapted to multinational requirements. 4. Reporting format implementation. Standardized reporting formats would be established for common operational requirements, including situation reports, engagement reporting, battle damage assessment, and intelligence summaries. These formats draw on Pakistan's experience developing similar standardization for joint operations across its own service branches with different reporting traditions. 5. Islamic operational procedure integration. Unique to this alliance, standard procedures would incorporate Islamic requirements, including prayer accommodation, dietary provisions, cultural sensitivity measures, and religious support during operations. These procedures demonstrate how Islamic principles enhance operational effectiveness by addressing spiritual needs that impact morale and cohesion. This procedural standardization creates common operational language, enabling diverse forces to work together effectively despite different national traditions. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience in numerous multinational operations, where procedural clarity proved essential for effective integration despite technical or doctrinal differences. The approach focuses on standardizing critical procedures with direct operational impact rather than attempting comprehensive uniformity regardless of functional significance. Doctrinal harmonization. At the conceptual level, the alliance would develop harmonized doctrine providing common understanding of operational principles while respecting diverse military traditions. 1. Core doctrinal publication development. Essential doctrine would be established through dedicated publications addressing fundamental concepts including command relationships, operational art, force protection, intelligence support, and logistics sustainment. These publications draw on Pakistan's sophisticated doctrinal tradition developed through decades of operational experience against both conventional and asymmetric threats. 2. Islamic military ethics integration. Alliance doctrine would explicitly incorporate Islamic ethical principles regarding justified use of force, proportionality, distinction between combatants and civilians, and other moral dimensions of military operations. This integration draws on Pakistan's experience developing military doctrine within Islamic ethical frameworks, demonstrating how religious principles enhance rather than constrain operational effectiveness. 3. Asymmetric approach emphasis. Recognizing the alliance faces potential adversaries with material advantages, doctrine would emphasize asymmetric approaches neutralizing superior numbers or technology through superior tactics, motivation, and maneuver. This emphasis draws directly on Pakistan's extensive experience asymmetric capabilities numerically superior against developing adversaries, particularly relevant to the alliance's likely operational challenges. 4. Counterterrorism operation standardization. Given terrorism's significance across the Muslim world, standardized counterterrorism doctrine would receive particular emphasis, establishing common approaches to intelligence, targeting, operations, and post-operation activities. This standardization draws on Pakistan's world-class counterterrorism experience developed through extensive operations against diverse terrorist groups. 5. Multinational command guidance. Specialized doctrine would address the unique challenges of multinational command, providing guidance for leaders managing forces from diverse cultures, languages, and military traditions. This guidance draws on Pakistan's extensive experience in United Nations leadership roles where effective multinational command required sophisticated approaches beyond conventional military leadership. This doctrinal harmonization creates common conceptual foundation enabling diverse forces to understand operations similarly despite different national military cultures. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing sophisticated doctrine addressing both conventional and asymmetric challenges while operating within Islamic ethical frameworks. The approach emphasizes conceptual alignment on fundamental principles while allowing appropriate national interpretation in application. Command relationship establishment. Effective multinational operations require clearly established command relationships defining authority, responsibility, and decision rights across national contingents and alliance structures. Command authority framework. The alliance would implement a sophisticated command authority framework clarifying precisely what powers alliance commanders exercise over national forces under different circumstances. 1. Graduated command authority system. Different levels of authority would be established ranging from full command for integrated alliance formations to coordinating authority for loosely affiliated national forces. This nuanced system draws on Pakistan's experience in both United Nations operations and bilateral exercises where command authority clarity directly impacts operational effectiveness regardless of force capability. 2. Mission-specific command arrangements. Rather than fixed structures regardless of operation type, command relationships would adapt to specific mission requirements, with different arrangements for counterterrorism, conventional defense, humanitarian assistance, and other operation categories. This flexible approach reflects Pakistan's military tradition emphasizing mission-specific organization rather than rigid structures regardless of operational context. 3. National Authority Reservation System. Explicit provisions would define specific authorities nations retain even after forces transfer to alliance command, including rules of engagement limitations, specific employment restrictions, and withdrawal conditions. This clear delineation draws on Pakistan's experience maintaining similar national authority while participating in multinational operations ranging from United Nations peacekeeping to bilateral exercises. For Islamic leadership principles integration, command relationship structures would incorporate Islamic leadership principles individual responsibilities alongside operational duties. This integration demonstrates how Islamic principles enhance rather than constrain command effectiveness through moral foundations that strengthen leadership legitimacy. 5. Consensus exception balance. While establishing consensus as general decision principle, the framework would include specific exception mechanisms for time-sensitive decisions requiring immediate action without full consultation. This balanced approach draws on Pakistan's military experience where neither absolute authority nor complete consensus proves effective across all operational circumstances. This command authority framework establishes clear understanding regarding who can direct what actions under what circumstances, essential clarity for effective multinational operations. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated relationships understanding of command developed through diverse multinational experiences from United Nations operations to bilateral exercises, creating systems that balance operational effectiveness with appropriate sovereign control. National contingent integration. Beyond formal authority frameworks, effective command requires practical integration of national contingents into alliance structures. 1. Liaison system implementation. Comprehensive liaison systems would be established at multiple command levels, providing both formal communication channels and relationship development essential for effective multinational operations. This system draws on Pakistan's experience deploying similar liaison capabilities during United Nations operations and bilateral exercises where human connections often prove more important than formal structures. 2. National Contingent Command Element Structure. Standardized structures would be established for National Contingent Command Elements, providing both connectivity to alliance headquarters and appropriate national oversight while avoiding disruptive parallel command chains. This structure draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar elements for its own forces operating under multinational command while maintaining appropriate national direction. 3. Cultural advisor integration. Specialized cultural advisors would support commanders managing multinational forces, providing insight into national military traditions, cultural sensitivities, and relationship dynamics affecting operational effectiveness. This integration draws on Pakistan's experience deploying similar capabilities during complex multinational operations where cultural understanding directly impacted leadership effectiveness. 4. Multinational staff integration model. Sophisticated approaches would integrate officers from diverse nations into single staff structures rather than segregated national cells, building genuine multinational perspective while enhancing trust across contributing nations. This integration model draws on Pakistan's extensive experience in both providing and receiving staff officers for multinational operations from United Nations missions to bilateral exercises. 5. Religious support coordination. Unique to this alliance, specialized coordination would ensure appropriate religious support for diverse Islamic traditions represented within multinational forces, addressing both spiritual needs and potential sectarian sensitivities. This coordination demonstrates the alliance's distinctive identity while addressing practical requirements for maintaining morale and cohesion in multinational Muslim forces. This national contingent integration transforms formal command arrangements into practical working relationships essential for effective multinational operations. The implementation draws on Pakistan's extensive experience developing similar integration approaches during diverse multinational operations, creating systems that balance necessary multinational cohesion with appropriate national identity preservation. Decision process implementation. Effective command requires clearly established decision processes enabling timely action while ensuring appropriate consultation and authorization. 1. Decision authority matrix development. Comprehensive matrices would define specific decision authorities across different operational contexts, command levels, and mission types, providing clear understanding of who can decide what under what circumstances. These matrices draw on Pakistan's experience developing similar decision frameworks for its own joint operations where decision clarity directly impacts operational tempo. 2. Time-sensitive decision protocols. Specialized protocols would address time-critical decisions requiring immediate action before complete consultation becomes possible, including retrospective notification requirements and review procedures. These protocols draw on Pakistan's military experience where balancing consultation requirements with operational tempo represents a persistent challenge requiring sophisticated solutions. 3. Islamic consultation integration. Decision processes would incorporate Islamic consultation principles, shura, while maintaining operational effectiveness, demonstrating how religious values enhance rather than constrain military decision-making through broader perspective consideration. This integration draws on Pakistan's experience developing military decision systems that incorporate religious principles without sacrificing operational effectiveness. 4. Escalation path clarification. Clear paths would be established for elevating decisions beyond immediate commander authority, including specified criteria, communication channels, and response timelines. This clarification draws on Pakistan's experience where unclear escalation requirements often create operational delays more damaging than the original situation. 5. Political-military interface management. Sophisticated mechanisms would govern interaction between political direction and military execution, including appropriate consultation requirements, information flow systems, and implementation verification. These mechanisms draw on Pakistan's extensive experience managing this critical interface during complex security operations where political alignment directly impacts military effectiveness. These decision process implementations convert theoretical command authorities into practical action mechanisms essential for operational effectiveness. The approach draws on Pakistan's sophisticated understanding of how decision systems impact military operations, particularly in multinational contexts where unclear processes often create more operational friction than enemy action. The implementation reflects lessons from the May 2025 crisis, where Pakistan's clear decision processes enabled rapid response while maintaining strategic control during intensely time-pressured situations. Rules of engagement harmonization. Effective multinational operations require cohesive force application governed by clearly understood rules of engagement that balance operational effectiveness with appropriate constraints. Common ROE framework development. The alliance would develop a sophisticated common framework governing force application across different operation types and contingencies. 1. Tiered ROE structure implementation. Rather than single rules regardless of context, a graduated system would establish different rules appropriate to operation type, threat level, and geographic context. This nuanced approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar frameworks for diverse operations ranging from counterterrorism to conventional defense where context-appropriate rules directly impact operational effectiveness. 2. Islamic Just War Principle Integration. Alliance ROE would explicitly incorporate Islamic legal and ethical principles regarding justified force application, proportionality requirements, civilian protection obligations, and prohibited methods. This integration draws on Pakistan's experience developing ROE within Islamic ethical frameworks, demonstrating how religious principles enhance rather than constrain operational effectiveness through moral clarity. 3. Tactical directive standardization. Beyond formal ROE, standardized tactical directives would provide detailed guidance for common situations including checkpoint operations, escalation of force procedures, and detention handling. This practical guidance draws on Pakistan's extensive experience where specific tactical direction often proves more effective than general principles for ensuring appropriate force application. 4. Commander guidance clarification. The framework would clarify commander authority to restrict, but not expand, ROE based on specific operational circumstances, providing appropriate tactical flexibility while maintaining strategic consistency. This clarification draws on Pakistan's military experience where command judgment regarding specific situations proves essential for effective ROE implementation while maintaining necessary constraints. 5. Visual ROE tools development. Practical tools including card summaries, decision trees, and scenario-based examples would be developed, enhancing understanding beyond formal legal language. These practical tools draw on Pakistan's experience developing similar resources for its own forces operating under complex ROE, where practical understanding proves as important as technical compliance. This common ROE framework establishes consistent understanding regarding appropriate force application across multinational forces with different training traditions and cultural backgrounds. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing and implementing complex ROE during diverse operations, where appropriate force application directly impacts both tactical success and strategic legitimacy. National ROE reconciliation. Beyond establishing common framework, the alliance would implement systematic approaches for reconciling different national ROE traditions and constraints. 1. Baseline compliance verification. Member state ROE would undergo comprehensive review ensuring compliance with minimum alliance standards derived from both international law and Islamic legal principles. This verification draws on Pakistan's experience evaluating similar compliance requirements for its own forces participating in multinational operations, where baseline legal standards provide essential foundation for effective integration. 2. National Caveat Management System. Formal procedures would manage specific national restrictions beyond alliance baseline, including documentation, communication to commanders, and operational planning integration. This systematic approach draws on Pakistan's experience managing similar caveats during United Nations operations, where transparent handling proves more effective than either ignoring or exaggerating national differences. 3. ROE discrepancy resolution process. Formal mechanisms would address situations where different national interpretations create operational friction, including escalation paths, reconciliation methods, and interim guidance pending resolution. These mechanisms draw on Pakistan's experience developing similar resolution processes for joint operations across its own services with different ROE traditions. 4. Mutual understanding enhancement. Beyond formal reconciliation, systematic efforts would build genuine understanding among multinational forces regarding different national approaches, including exchange programs, comparative training, and facilitated discussion. These efforts draw on Pakistan's experience building similar understanding during multinational exercises where appreciation for different perspectives often proves more effective than force standardization. 5. Islamic scholarly consultation. Unique to this alliance, formal mechanisms would engage religious scholars helping resolve apparent conflicts between different Islamic legal interpretations regarding force application. This distinctive approach demonstrates the alliance's authentic Islamic character while providing practical resolution mechanisms for potential differences among member states with different jurisprudential traditions. This national ROE reconciliation transforms potentially conflicting rules into compatible approaches, enabling effective multinational operations. The implementation draws on Pakistan's extensive experience managing similar challenges during diverse multinational operations, creating systems that acknowledge legitimate national differences while establishing sufficient commonality for operational effectiveness. ROE training and implementation. Beyond formal rules, effective ROE implementation requires comprehensive training ensuring genuine understanding and application under operational conditions. 1. Standardized ROE training methodology. Common training approaches would be established, including scenario-based exercises, decision simulations, and practical application drills, ensuring consistent implementation across different national contingents. This methodology draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar training for its own forces where practical exercise proves more effective than classroom instruction alone for ensuring proper ROE application under stress. 2. Leadership Emphasis Program. Specialized training would develop leader understanding of their critical role in ROE implementation through personal example, subordinate guidance, and vigilant supervision. This leadership emphasis draws on Pakistan's military culture where commander responsibility for unit conduct represents non-delegable duty directly impacting force discipline. 3. Consequence awareness development. Training would explicitly address potential strategic consequences of ROE violations, including impact on mission legitimacy, alliance reputation, and public support. This awareness development draws on Pakistan's experience, where understanding strategic implications often proves more effective than merely procedural compliance for ensuring appropriate conduct. 4. Cultural context integration. ROE training would incorporate relevant cultural context regarding local customs, religious practices, and social norms affecting appropriate force application in different operational environments. This integration draws on Pakistan's experience, where cultural understanding directly impacts ability to distinguish threats from normal behavior in complex environments. 5. Islamic ethical foundation emphasis. Beyond technical compliance, training would develop deeper understanding of Islamic ethical principles underlying ROE, including religious obligations regarding civilian protection, proportional force, and honorable conduct. This emphasis draws on Pakistan's experience, where moral foundation often proves more effective than mere rule compliance for ensuring appropriate conduct under stress. This comprehensive training and implementation approach transforms written rules into operational reality through genuine understanding and internalization. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing similar training for its own forces, where effective ROE implementation directly impacts both tactical success and strategic legitimacy, particularly in complex environments where rules cannot anticipate every situation. Legal status of forces agreements. Effective multinational operations require clear legal frameworks governing force status in territories where alliance forces operate, including both member states and potential operation areas outside alliance territory. Intra-alliance SOFA development. The alliance would establish comprehensive agreements governing forces operating in fellow member territories during exercises, operations, or transit. 1. Model SOFA template creation. A standardized template would be developed addressing critical status issues including jurisdiction, criminal and civil liability, privileges and immunities, claims procedures, and tax exemptions. This template draws on Pakistan's extensive experience with similar agreements governing its forces abroad and foreign forces on its territory, identifying essential provisions while allowing appropriate national adaptation. 2. Islamic legal principle integration. Unique to this alliance, the SOFA framework would explicitly incorporate relevant Islamic legal principles regarding guest obligations, host responsibilities, and mutual respect requirements. This integration demonstrates how Islamic jurisprudence provides relevant guidance for contemporary legal challenges while enhancing framework legitimacy across member states with different legal traditions. 3. Jurisdiction balance establishment. Sophisticated provisions would balance exclusive jurisdiction for official duty acts with host nation jurisdiction for non-duty conduct, creating appropriate accountability while protecting operational effectiveness. This balanced approach draws on Pakistan's experience negotiating similar provisions in its own status agreements where neither complete immunity nor full local jurisdiction proves practically effective. 4. Religious accommodation provisions. Specific provisions would address religious practice accommodation including prayer facilities, dietary requirements, religious observance opportunities, and chaplain services. These distinctive provisions reflect the alliance's Islamic identity while addressing practical requirements for multinational Muslim forces operating across diverse Islamic societies. 5. Implementation mechanism development. Beyond formal agreement, practical mechanisms would be established for implementation including liaison officers, dispute resolution processes, and regular consultation. These mechanisms draw on Pakistan's experience where practical implementation arrangements often prove as important as formal agreement text for avoiding unnecessary friction. This intra-alliance SOFA creates clear legal framework enabling smooth force operation across member territories without sovereignty concerns or legal ambiguities undermining operational effectiveness. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated understanding of how legal frameworks impact military operations, particularly in multinational contexts where unclear status often creates unnecessary complications diverting attention from mission requirements. External operation legal frameworks. Beyond member territories, the alliance would develop sophisticated legal approaches for operations in non-member territories under different authorization scenarios. 1. Unmandated Operation Framework. Comprehensive provisions would address alliance forces operating under United Nations mandate, including command relationships, legal protections, and implementation mechanisms beyond standard UN models. This specialized framework draws on Pakistan's extensive UN peacekeeping experience, adapting established models to alliance-specific requirements while maintaining international legal compliance. 2. Host Nation Consent Operation Model. Specialized agreements would govern operations conducted with host nation consent outside formal UN mandate, including status provisions, operational authorities, and jurisdiction arrangements. This model draws on Pakistan's experience with similar bilateral security agreements where clear legal framework proves essential for operational effectiveness while protecting both host and contributing nation interests. 3. Non-permissive entry legal framework. Without endorsing an authorized intervention, contingency frameworks would address legal aspects of operations where immediate action becomes necessary despite absence of formal consent or UN mandate. This framework draws on Pakistan's sophisticated understanding of international law regarding humanitarian intervention, collective self-defense, and protection of nationals while establishing appropriate constraints consistent with both international law and Islamic principles. 4. Islamic territory liberation provisions. Unique to this alliance, specialized legal frameworks would address operations liberating Muslim territories from occupation, incorporating both international legal principles and Islamic jurisprudence regarding legitimate resistance against occupation. These provisions reflect the alliance's distinctive identity while addressing practical legal requirements for potential operations of particular significance to member states. 5. Transitional administration arrangements. Comprehensive frameworks would address alliance legal responsibilities when temporarily administering territories following intervention, including applicable law, governance structures, and transition mechanisms. These arrangements draw on Pakistan's experience contributing to similar transitional situations where clear legal framework proves essential for effective stabilization while avoiding unnecessary complications. These external operation legal frameworks provide clear guidance for potential alliance operations beyond member territories, establishing necessary legal foundation while reflecting both international law and Islamic legal principles. The implementation draws on Pakistan's extensive experience. Operating under diverse legal frameworks from United Nations peacekeeping to bilateral security operations, creating systems that balance operational effectiveness with appropriate legal constraint. Coalition partner arrangements. Recognizing the alliance may operate alongside non-member partners in certain scenarios, specialized legal frameworks would govern these coalition relationships. 1. Coalition Partner Status Framework. Standardized templates would establish legal status for non-member forces operating alongside alliance elements, addressing jurisdiction, liability, claims, and other critical status issues. These templates draw on Pakistan's experience developing similar arrangements during multinational operations where clear partner status proves essential for effective cooperation. 2. Integrated Command Legal Provisions. Specialized provisions would address legal aspects of command integration with non-member forces, including authority limits, responsibility boundaries, and accountability mechanisms. These provisions draw on Pakistan's experience in operations involving multiple command frameworks where legal clarity regarding command relationships directly impacts operational effectiveness. 3. Intelligence Sharing Legal Framework. Specific arrangements would govern intelligence exchange with coalition partners, addressing classification compatibility, use limitations, source protection, and liability issues. This framework draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience managing similar intelligence relationships with diverse partners from China to the United States, balancing sharing requirements with appropriate protection measures. 4. Combined ROE harmonization. Formal mechanisms would reconcile alliance ROE with coalition partner rules, identifying conflicts, establishing resolution procedures, and developing operational workarounds where necessary. These mechanisms draw on Pakistan's experience managing similar ROE differences during multinational operations where practical harmonization proves essential for effective combined operations. 5. Islamic Western Legal Bridge. Specialized provisions would address potential tensions between Islamic legal principles governing alliance forces and Western legal traditions often governing potential coalition partners. These unique bridging provisions draw on Pakistan's extensive experience operating within both legal traditions, developing practical harmonization approaches that maintain Islamic principles while non-Muslim partners, enabling effective cooperation with. These coalition partner arrangements provide flexible frameworks for cooperation with non-member forces when operational requirements necessitate combined action. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience operating alongside diverse partners from China to NATO forces in Afghanistan, creating systems that enable effective cooperation without compromising alliance principles or operational effectiveness. Conclusion: from parallel forces to integrated capability. The force integration process transforms the Muslim security architecture from parallel national forces to genuinely integrated capability through systematic designation of alliance roles, implementation of interoperability standards, establishment of clear command relationships, harmonization of rules of engagement, and development of comprehensive legal frameworks. This transformation creates the operational coherence necessary for effective collective security while respecting sovereign identities and diverse military traditions. Pakistan's leadership of this process would draw on its unique qualifications spanning multinational operation experience, interoperability development expertise, command relationship management, ROE implementation sophistication, and legal framework negotiation. The approach would balance Islamic principles of brotherhood and unified action with practical military requirements for effective force integration, creating multinational capabilities that address contemporary challenges while maintaining authentic Islamic character. The force integration process directly addresses several critical security challenges facing the Muslim world. By establishing clear command relationships and interoperability standards, the architecture counters external military interventions that previously exploited fragmentation among Muslim states. Through implementing common ROE and legal frameworks, the alliance creates legitimate yet effective security capabilities addressing both conventional and asymmetric threats. By harmonizing different national military traditions within common operational frameworks, the alliance transforms diversity from potential weakness to strategic strength through complementary capabilities. Most fundamentally, the force integration process converts numerical mass into strategic weight through coherent organization, enabling unified action despite diverse national military traditions. The resulting capability implements the Quranic guidance to hold firmly together and not become divided through practical military integration rather than merely symbolic unity. By establishing Pakistan's central role in this integration, building on its sophisticated understanding of both Islamic principles and modern military requirements, the process institutionalizes the natural leadership qualification demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis when Pakistan's military excellence provided model for the broader Muslim world. The integrated force capability established through this process would provide the operational foundation for addressing the Muslim world's critical security challenges as detailed in subsequent chapters. This foundation, balancing practical integration with appropriate sovereignty respect, would enable the Muslim world to exercise defensive capabilities commensurate with its size and importance rather than accepting fragmented vulnerability. Through this force integration process, Pakistan would fulfill its historic role as the guardian that transforms separate national forces into coherent capability through qualitative excellence guided by Islamic principles and implemented with sophisticated military professionalism. Chapter 78. Exercise and Validation. Program. O you who have believed, persevere and endure and remain stationed and fear Allah that you may be successful. Quran 3:200. With command structures established and forces designated for alliance roles, the Muslim security architecture requires a comprehensive exercise and validation program to transform theoretical capabilities into demonstrated readiness. This process develops, tests, and refines collective capabilities through progressively challenging scenarios that validate effectiveness while identifying improvement requirements. The Quranic injunction to persevere and endure and remain stationed provides both spiritual guidance and practical wisdom. Effective security requires not merely established capabilities but persistent readiness developed through rigorous preparation. This chapter examines how Pakistan would lead the alliance exercise and validation program, applying both Islamic principles of excellence through discipline and modern military training methodologies to create proven capabilities that deter adversaries through demonstrated rather than merely declared readiness. Progressive development. Exercise complexity. The foundation of effective capability validation lies in a deliberately progressive exercise program that builds from basic interoperability to complex multinational operations through graduated challenge increasing. Foundational interoperability exercises. The exercise program begins with focused events testing basic interaction capabilities essential for more complex operations. 1. Command Post Communications Exercises. Initial events would test fundamental communication connectivity between alliance headquarters, national command elements, and designated forces through structured scenarios requiring basic information exchange. These limited exercises draw on Pakistan's experience developing similar baseline validation for its Joint Command System, where communication verification provides essential foundation for more complex operations. 2. Staff Integration Procedures Testing. Focused events would validate staff procedures for multinational planning, coordination, and information management through simulated scenarios requiring collaborative problem solving. These exercises draw on Pakistan's experience developing effective staff integration methodologies for joint operations where procedural clarity directly impacts planning effectiveness regardless of individual staff officer capability. 3. Standard Operating Procedure Validation. Dedicated exercises would test implementation of alliance standard operating procedures across diverse national contingents through controlled scenarios focusing on specific functional areas including logistics, intelligence sharing, and force protection. This validation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar procedure testing for its own joint operations where practical implementation often reveals challenges not apparent during procedural development. 4. Technical Interface System Verification. Specialized events would verify functionality of interface systems connecting diverse national equipment types, communications protocols, and data formats through structured interoperability challenges. This verification draws on Pakistan's experience testing similar systems within its own forces where equipment diversity resulting from varied procurement sources creates comparable integration challenges. 5. Islamic Mission Framework Validation. Unique to this alliance, dedicated events would verify integration of Islamic requirements including prayer accommodation, halal logistics, religious support services, and cultural sensitivities into operational procedures. This distinctive validation demonstrates how religious principles enhance rather than constrain military effectiveness through comprehensive preparation addressing both material and spiritual readiness. These foundational exercises establish basic interaction capabilities essential for more complex operations while building command relationships and procedural familiarity across diverse national contingents. The approach draws on Pakistan's military training philosophy emphasizing mastery of fundamentals before progressing to advanced operations, a methodology particularly appropriate for multinational forces where basic interoperability cannot be assumed despite formal agreements. Functional Domain Exercises. Building on foundational capabilities, the program would implement specialized exercises testing capability in specific functional domains. 1. Counterterrorism Exercise Series. A dedicated program would validate alliance counterterrorism capabilities through progressive scenarios ranging from intelligence sharing and preventive operations to post-attack response and consequence management. This series draws on Pakistan's world-class counter-terrorism experience developed through extensive operations against diverse terrorist groups, providing both doctrinal foundation and validation methodology appropriate to this critical alliance mission. 2. Critical infrastructure protection validation. Specialized exercises would test capabilities for protecting energy facilities, transportation nodes, water resources, and other critical infrastructure through realistic scenarios involving both physical and cyber threats. This validation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for its own critical infrastructure, where integrated security approaches proved essential against multidimensional threat vectors demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis. 3. Sacred Site Protection Exercise Program. Unique to this alliance, dedicated events would validate specialized capabilities for protecting Islamic holy sites, cultural heritage, and religious gatherings through tailored scenarios addressing the distinctive security requirements of these sensitive locations. This specialized program demonstrates the alliance's authentic Islamic identity while addressing security concerns with particular emotional resonance across the Muslim world. For humanitarian assistance capability testing, reflecting Islamic humanitarian principles, dedicated exercises would validate disaster response, refugee support, and civilian protection capabilities through realistic scenarios requiring rapid deployment and effective coordination. This testing draws on Pakistan's extensive experience in both natural disaster management and conflict zone humanitarian operations from Kashmir earthquakes to regional flood relief. 5. Cyber Defense Exercise Program. Sophisticated events would test alliance cyber defense capabilities through realistic scenarios involving network penetration attempts, critical system attacks, and information operation challenges. This program draws on Pakistan's rapidly developing cyber defense capabilities demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis, where effective cyber operations proved essential components of modern security operations. These functional domain exercises develop specific capabilities essential for alliance missions while building specialized expertise across the multinational force. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar domain-specific validation for its own forces, where focused training in priority areas proved more effective than generalized preparation given resource constraints. The approach reflects Pakistan's strategic tradition of developing asymmetric excellence in critical domains rather than attempting equal capability across all areas regardless of priority or resource availability. Complex multinational operations exercises. At the most advanced level, comprehensive exercises would validate integrated capabilities through complex scenarios testing multiple domains simultaneously. 1. Regional Defense Exercise Series. Advanced events would test territorial defense capabilities against sophisticated conventional threats through large-scale scenarios involving multiple domains, force types, and geographic areas. These exercises draw on Pakistan's experience developing similar validation for its own territorial defense, where realistic challenge proved essential for identifying capability gaps not apparent during more limited testing. 2. Multi-domain integration validation. Sophisticated exercises would test synchronization across land, air, maritime, cyber, and information domains through complex scenarios requiring coordinated effects rather than merely parallel operations. This validation draws on Pakistan's growing experience in multi-domain operations demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis, where domain integration proved decisive for achieving strategic effects despite resource constraints. 3. Command transition testing. Specialized events would validate command continuity through scenarios requiring transition between headquarters elements, replacement of disabled command nodes, and operations despite communication disruption. This testing draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar validation for its own command resilience, where continuity capabilities proved essential for operations in contested environments where adversaries specifically target command functions. For extended crisis exercise, comprehensive events would test sustained operations over extended periods, validating endurance, logistics sustainment, personnel rotation, and operational persistence beyond initial deployment. This validation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar endurance testing for its own forces, where sustained capability often proved more challenging than initial effectiveness, particularly under resource constraints. 5. Strategic Decision Exercise Program. Executive-level events would test political military decision processes through complex scenarios requiring consultation, decision-making under uncertainty, and consequence management across diplomatic, information, military, and economic domains. This program draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing similar exercises for its own strategic leadership, where decision process validation proved as important as tactical capability for effective crisis management. These complex exercises validate alliance capability to conduct sophisticated multinational operations while identifying integration challenges not apparent during more limited testing. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing realistic validation for its own joint operations, where comprehensive assessment under challenging conditions proved essential for genuine capability development rather than merely assumed readiness. The approach reflects lessons from the May 2025 crisis, where capabilities validated through realistic testing demonstrated actual effectiveness while untested assumptions sometimes proved dangerously misleading during operations. Certification Exercise Design. Beyond progressive development, the Alliance requires formal certification exercises that objectively validate capabilities against established standards through rigorous evaluation. Standardized evaluation methodology. The foundation of effective certification lies in consistent evaluation methodology providing objective assessment across diverse force elements. 1. Tiered evaluation standard development. Graduated standards would be established for different certification levels from basic interoperability through advanced integration, providing appropriate requirements based on force role, mission type, and alliance commitment level. This nuanced approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar standards for its own forces, where differentiated requirements proved more effective than universal standards regardless of unit role or mission. 2. Measurable performance criteria. Specific, observable criteria would be established for evaluating performance across different functional areas, replacing subjective impression with quantifiable assessment based on actual task completion. This objective approach draws on Pakistan's military evaluation experience where measurable criteria proved essential for consistent assessment across different evaluators and operating conditions. 3. Islamic Excellence Standards Integration. Certification would incorporate Islamic principles regarding excellence, ihsan, discipline, integrity, and ethical conduct alongside technical performance measures. This integration demonstrates how religious principles enhance military effectiveness through comprehensive standards addressing both technical capability and moral conduct essential for genuine security excellence. 4. Independent evaluation team structure. Multinational teams comprising experts from member states not participating in the evaluated exercise would conduct assessment, ensuring objective evaluation rather than self-certification or peer accommodation. This independent structure draws on Pakistan's experience with similar evaluation for United Nations certification, where external assessment proved more credible and rigorous than internal review. 5. Environmental variation requirement. Certification methodology would require demonstration across different environmental conditions including day and night operations, adverse weather, electromagnetic interference, and other challenging factors. This comprehensive approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar requirements for its own force certification, where capability across varying conditions proved essential for operational reliability. This standardized evaluation methodology transforms subjective judgment into consistent assessment essential for credible certification. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated military evaluation experience developed through decades of operational testing, creating systems that identify genuine capability rather than merely procedural compliance. The approach reflects Pakistan's military culture emphasizing honest assessment as foundation for improvement rather than inflated evaluation that creates false confidence in untested capabilities. Scenario-based evaluation design. Effective certification requires realistic scenarios testing actual capability rather than predetermined demonstrations that fail to validate adaptive performance. 1. Reality-based scenario development. Certification scenarios would be developed from actual regional contingencies, historical precedents, and current intelligence assessments rather than generic situations with limited relevance to likely alliance operations. This realistic approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar scenario-based training from actual operational challenges, where reality-derived scenarios proved more effective for capability development than artificial constructs. 2. Opposing force implementation. Dedicated red teams would provide thinking, adaptive opposition during certification rather than predictable scripted resistance, creating genuine challenge that tests actual capability rather than rehearsed performance. This implementation draws on Pakistan's military training tradition emphasizing realistic opposition, where adaptive challenge proved essential for developing forces capable of responding to unexpected developments during actual operations. 3. Injects and contingencies integration. Scenarios would incorporate unannounced complications, requirement changes, and unexpected developments requiring adaptation rather than merely executing predetermined plans. This dynamic approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar validation methodologies for its own forces, where adaptive capacity often proved more important than initial plan quality during complex operations. 4. Degraded operations requirement. Certification would require demonstration under degraded conditions including communications interference, logistics constraints, personnel casualties, and equipment limitations rather than ideal operating environments. This challenging approach draws on Pakistan's military reality where resource constraints and adversary action regularly create suboptimal conditions requiring effective adaptation. 5. Islamic ethical challenge integration. Unique to this alliance, scenarios would incorporate ethical challenges testing application of Islamic principles regarding civilian protection, proportionality, distinction, and other moral requirements in complex situations. This distinctive approach demonstrates how religious principles provide practical guidance for complex security decisions while testing both technical capability and ethical judgment. This scenario-based evaluation design validates actual operational capability rather than merely ceremonial demonstration or scripted performance. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing effective validation methodologies for its own forces operating in challenging environments where adaptive performance proved essential for success against thinking adversaries. The approach reflects lessons from the May 2025 crisis, where forces tested through realistic scenarios demonstrated significantly greater effectiveness than those validated through predictable demonstrations with limited resemblance to actual operations. Comprehensive domain coverage. Effective certification requires validation across all operational domains rather than merely traditional kinetic capabilities. 1. Cyber domain certification. Specialized evaluation would test defensive and offensive cyber capabilities through realistic scenarios involving actual network penetration attempts, system compromise efforts, and information operation challenges. This domain coverage draws on Pakistan's growing cyber capability demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis, where cyber operations proved essential components of modern security despite often receiving less evaluation attention than conventional capabilities. 2. Information operations validation. Dedicated assessment would evaluate strategic communication, influence operations, and narrative management capabilities through realistic scenarios requiring coordinated information effects. This validation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing similar capabilities during previous crises where information dominance often proved as decisive as physical operations for strategic outcomes. 3. Electronic warfare certification. Specialized testing would validate electronic warfare capabilities including communications protection, radar degradation, navigation disruption, and spectrum management through realistic electronic combat scenarios. This certification draws on Pakistan's extensive electronic warfare experience demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis, where electromagnetic spectrum dominance directly impacted operational effectiveness. For intelligence capability validation, comprehensive assessment would evaluate intelligence collection, analysis, dissemination, and utilization capabilities through realistic scenarios requiring accurate situational understanding despite deliberate deception and information limitations. This validation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated intelligence methodology developed through decades of operational requirements where intelligence effectiveness directly impacted strategic outcomes. 5. Logistics Sustainment Certification. Dedicated evaluation would assess logistics capabilities including supply chain resilience, maintenance effectiveness, transportation reliability, and resource management through extended scenarios testing actual sustainment rather than merely initial deployment. This certification draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar validation for its own forces operating under resource constraints where logistics effectiveness often proved decisive for sustained operations. This comprehensive domain coverage ensures certification across all operational areas rather than merely traditional combat capabilities receiving disproportionate attention. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated understanding of modern security operations requiring integration across multiple domains for strategic effectiveness. The approach reflects lessons from contemporary conflicts where success increasingly depends on non-kinetic capabilities often receiving insufficient validation despite their growing operational significance. Lessons learned system implementation. Beyond evaluation, genuine capability development requires sophisticated systems capturing, analyzing, and implementing lessons from exercise experiences through systematic knowledge management. Structured observation and collection. The foundation of effective learning begins with systematic observation and information collection during exercises. 1. Trained Observer Program Development. A dedicated cadre of specialized observers would be developed with specific training in objective observation, data collection, and analysis methodologies. This program draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for its own force development, where trained observation proved significantly more valuable than casual impression for identifying meaningful patterns and improvement opportunities. 2. A multi-perspective collection system. Observations would be gathered from multiple perspectives including exercise participants, observers, opposition forces, and external evaluators, creating comprehensive understanding rather than single viewpoint assessment. This systematic approach draws on Pakistan's military learning methodology where diverse perspectives often revealed insights not apparent from any single observation position. 3. Technical data capture integration. Objective data collection would supplement human observation through communications recording, position tracking, engagement documentation, and other technical collection enhancing analysis precision. This integration draws on Pakistan's growing experience incorporating similar technical collection into its exercise evaluation, where objective data often revealed patterns not apparent through observation alone. 4. Islamic self-reflection methodology. Unique to this alliance, structured self-assessment would incorporate Islamic principles regarding honest self-evaluation, continuous improvement responsibility, and integrity in acknowledging shortfalls. This distinctive approach demonstrates how religious principles enhance military effectiveness through moral framework encouraging genuine rather than superficial assessment. 5. Standardized collection templates. Consistent documentation formats would be implemented ensuring observation captures essential information including context, actions, effects, and contributing factors rather than merely outcomes. These standardized templates draw on Pakistan's experience developing similar formats for its own lessons collection, where information completeness directly impacted subsequent analysis quality. This structured observation and collection transforms exercise experiences into usable information supporting genuine learning rather than anecdotal impressions with limited analytical value. The implementation draws on Pakistan's growing experience developing similar systems for its own force development, where systematic collection proved essential for identifying patterns beyond obvious observations. The approach reflects Pakistan's military culture increasingly emphasizing knowledge management as foundation for capability development despite resource constraints requiring efficient learning from limited exercise opportunities. Analysis and validation process. Collected observations require sophisticated analysis, transforming raw information into validated lessons through structured examination. 1. Root cause analysis implementation. Systematic methodology would identify fundamental causes rather than merely symptoms, examining why shortfalls occurred rather than simply documenting their existence. This analytical depth draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar approaches for its own capability development, where addressing root causes proved more effective than merely treating visible manifestations. 2. Pattern recognition methodology. Analytical techniques would identify recurring patterns across multiple observations, exercises, and units, distinguishing systemic issues requiring policy-level intervention from isolated incidents addressable through local correction. This sophisticated approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar analysis for its own force development, where pattern recognition often revealed institutional challenges not apparent from individual incidents. 3. Cross-domain impact assessment. Analysis would examine how issues in one domain affect capabilities in others, identifying integration challenges and cascading effects rather than merely domain-specific concerns. This comprehensive assessment draws on Pakistan's growing experience in multi-domain operations, where cross-domain interactions often proved more challenging than single-domain capabilities during the May 2025 crisis. 4. Comparative benchmarking integration. Analysis would incorporate comparison against both historical performance and established standards, providing context for determining significance and prioritization rather than isolated assessment. This contextual approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar comparative analysis for its own capability development, where benchmarking proved essential for meaningful evaluation rather than arbitrary judgment. 5. Islamic consultative validation. Unique to this alliance, analysis would incorporate shura, consultation, principles bringing diverse perspectives to lesson validation, ensuring thorough examination rather than narrow assessment. This distinctive approach demonstrates how Islamic principles enhance military effectiveness through collective wisdom, improving analytical quality beyond individual perspective limitations. This analysis and validation process transforms raw observations into meaningful lessons through sophisticated examination, identifying genuine improvement opportunities rather than superficial adjustments. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar analytical capabilities for its own force development, where methodological rigor directly impacted subsequent improvement effectiveness. The approach reflects Pakistan's military emphasis on intellectual depth alongside technical capability, recognizing that understanding problems properly often proves as important as implementing solutions. Lessons implementation tracking. Effective learning requires not merely identifying lessons but systematically implementing improvements through structured follow-through. 1. Actionable recommendation development. Analysis would produce specific, implementable recommendations rather than general observations, identifying responsible elements, required resources, and implementation timelines. This practical approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar recommendation formats for its own force improvement, where specificity directly impacted implementation likelihood compared to vague guidance. 2. Formal assignment and accountability. Implementation responsibility would be explicitly assigned to specific organizational elements with formal tracking and periodic progress review, ensuring accountability rather than optional consideration. This structured approach draws on Pakistan's military tradition, emphasizing clear responsibility assignment where accountability mechanisms directly impacted completion rates for improvement initiatives. 3. Resource alignment verification. Implementation planning would include explicit resource identification and commitment, preventing recommendations exceeding available capabilities while ensuring necessary support for priority improvements. This pragmatic approach draws on Pakistan's experience implementing similar verification for its own force development, where resource alignment proved essential for translating lessons into actual capabilities within realistic constraints. 4. Validation exercise integration. Subsequent exercises would explicitly test implementation effectiveness through scenarios specifically designed to verify improvement in previously identified shortfall areas. This closed-loop approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar validation for its own capability development, where specific testing proved essential for confirming actual rather than merely documented improvement. 5. Knowledge management system development. A comprehensive database would maintain lesson history, implementation status, validation results, and related information, enabling pattern analysis while preventing lesson rediscovery across multiple exercises. This systematic approach draws on Pakistan's growing experience developing similar knowledge management for its own force development, where institutional memory proved essential for cumulative rather than cyclical improvement. Capability. This implementation tracking transforms identified lessons into actual improvement through systematic follow-through rather than merely documented observations without practical effect. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar tracking mechanisms for its own force development, where structured accountability proved essential for translating analysis into capability enhancement. The approach reflects Pakistan's pragmatic military culture, emphasizing practical outcomes rather than merely intellectual understanding, ensuring lessons truly result in improved capability rather than merely informative reports. Capability gap identification process. Beyond evaluating existing capabilities, the exercise program must systematically identify capability gaps requiring development through structured assessment of operational requirements against demonstrated performance. Requirements-based gap analysis. The foundation of effective gap identification lies in systematic comparison between operational requirements and validated capabilities. 1. Mission Essential Task Analysis. Comprehensive analysis would identify specific tasks alliance forces must perform to execute core missions, establishing clear capability requirements against which existing performance can be measured. This systematic approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar analysis for its own force requirements, where mission-focused assessment proved more effective than generic capability comparison. 2. Threat-based capability assessment. Rigorous analysis would examine validated capabilities against current and emerging threat capabilities, identifying specific areas where alliance forces lack effective counters to adversary systems or tactics. This threat-oriented approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar assessments for its own capability planning, where realistic threat evaluation proved essential for relevant gap identification. 3. Scenario-driven shortfall identification. Carefully designed exercise scenarios would deliberately stress specific capability areas, revealing limitations and breaking points that might remain hidden during less challenging evaluation. This deliberate testing draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar stress testing for its own forces, where scenario manipulation proved effective for revealing otherwise obscured limitations. 4. Comparative capability benchmarking. Alliance capabilities would be systematically compared against relevant external standards including potential adversaries, advanced military powers, and historical requirements from similar operations. This comparative approach draws on Pakistan's experience conducting similar benchmarking for its own capability development, where external comparison often revealed gaps not apparent through internal assessment alone. 5. This Islamic security requirement integration, unique to alliance, analysis would incorporate distinctive requirements deriving from Islamic principles, including sacred site protection, pilgrimage security, and Muslim minority defense capabilities beyond conventional military requirements. This distinctive approach demonstrates the alliance's authentic character while ensuring capability development addresses security concerns with particular significance across the Muslim world. This requirements-based gap analysis provides systematic identification of capability shortfalls through structured comparison rather than ad hoc observation. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing similar methodologies for its own force requirements despite resource constraints necessitating careful prioritization. The approach reflects Pakistan's strategic tradition of capability development based on specific operational requirements rather than generic military modernization regardless of actual security needs. Prioritization methodology. Identified gaps require sophisticated prioritization, ensuring development efforts focus on most significant requirements given inevitable resource constraints. 1. Risk-based assessment implementation. A structured methodology would evaluate capability gaps based on both potential consequence severity and occurrence likelihood, focusing resources on high-impact, high-probability shortfalls. This analytical approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar prioritization for its own capability development, where risk-based assessment proved essential for effective resource allocation given financial constraints. 2. Strategic alignment evaluation. Prioritization would consider alignment with alliance strategic objectives, ensuring capability development supports core missions rather than peripheral concerns regardless of technical interest. This mission-focused approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar alignment evaluation for its own force development, where strategic focus proved essential for preventing capability dispersion across too many initiatives. 3. Development feasibility analysis. Realistic assessment would consider technical feasibility, resource requirements, timeline projections, and implementation challenges alongside operational importance when establishing priorities. This pragmatic approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar feasibility assessment for its own capability initiatives, where implementation realism proved essential for preventing unproductive pursuit of theoretically desirable but practically unachievable capabilities. For asymmetric impact potential, special consideration would identify capabilities offering disproportionate strategic impact relative to development cost, particularly those providing effective counters to adversary advantages through asymmetric approaches. This efficiency-focused assessment draws on Pakistan's extensive experience developing similar asymmetric capabilities against numerically superior adversaries, where selective investment in high-leverage capabilities proved essential given resource constraints. 5. Islamic consensus development. Unique to this alliance, prioritization would incorporate shura, consultation, principles ensuring diverse member perspectives inform priority setting rather than dominant nation imposition. This distinctive approach demonstrates how Islamic principles enhance military effectiveness through collective wisdom, improving decision quality beyond individual nation perspective limitations. This prioritization methodology transforms gap identification into actionable development priorities through sophisticated assessment considering multiple factors beyond mere technical desirability. The implementation draws on Pakistan's extensive experience managing capability development under significant resource constraints, where effective prioritization proved essential for maintaining strategic effectiveness despite limited development resources. The approach reflects Pakistan's military tradition, emphasizing quality capabilities in critical domains rather than attempting comprehensive development across all areas regardless of strategic significance or resource availability. Innovative solution development. Beyond identifying and prioritizing gaps, the alliance would implement systematic approaches for developing innovative solutions through creative problem-solving rather than merely conventional capability development. 1. Cross-domain solution workshops. Specialized events would bring together experts from diverse domains including military, technological, academic, and industrial sectors to develop innovative approaches addressing priority capability gaps. These collaborative workshops draw on Pakistan's experience developing similar innovation processes for its own capability challenges, where cross-domain thinking often generated solutions not apparent within traditional military development channels. 2. Alternative approach competitions. Structured competitions would encourage multiple solution proposals for priority gaps, creating healthy rivalry that generates diverse approaches rather than single-path development. This competitive approach draws on Pakistan's experience implementing similar programs for its own capability development, where alternative solution exploration often yielded unexpectedly effective options beyond conventional approaches. 3. Indigenous technology leveraging. Systematic assessment would identify existing technologies across member states that could address alliance capability gaps through adaptation, integration, or repurposing rather than new development. This efficient approach draws on Pakistan's extensive experience adapting available technologies for security applications, where creative utilization of existing capabilities often proved more practical than developing entirely new systems given resource constraints. For asymmetric counters emphasis, special focus would identify unconventional approaches neutralizing adversary advantages through asymmetric solutions rather than attempting symmetrical competition in areas of enemy strength. This pragmatic emphasis draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing similar asymmetric capabilities against India's numerical advantages, where indirect approaches often proved more effective than resource-prohibitive symmetrical competition. 5. Islamic Innovation Heritage Inspiration. Unique to this alliance, solution development would draw inspiration from the Islamic Golden Age's scientific and military innovations, connecting contemporary development to this intellectual tradition while inspiring creative thinking beyond conventional military paradigms. This distinctive approach demonstrates the alliance's authentic character while potentially generating unique solutions derived from Islamic intellectual heritage. This innovative solution development transforms gap identification from problem statement to creative resolution through systematic approaches encouraging unconventional thinking. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience, developing similar innovation methodologies for its own capability challenges, where resource constraints necessitated creative approaches beyond traditional military acquisition or development. The approach reflects Pakistan's strategic tradition of achieving effectiveness against superior adversaries through innovation rather than mere imitation of conventional capability development appropriateness. Regardless of improvement plan development. Contextual. The culmination of exercise validation and gap identification is systematic improvement planning that translates assessment into specific enhancement initiatives through structured development processes. Capability Development Roadmap Creation. The alliance would establish comprehensive roadmaps guiding capability development through coordinated, sequenced improvement initiatives. 1. Long-term capability vision establishment. Strategic level planning would establish clear capability objectives with 510-year horizons, providing direction and continuity beyond immediate exercise observations. This long-term approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar strategic visions for its own force development, where enduring direction proved essential for improvement rather than reactive adjustments. Cumulative. 2. Phase development sequencing. Detailed planning would establish logical development sequences ensuring foundational capabilities precede advanced systems, technical enablers support operational capabilities, and interdependent developments progress in coordinated fashion. This methodical approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar sequencing for its own capability initiatives, where proper phasing proved essential for effective progress given resource limitations preventing simultaneous development across all requirements. 3. Technology insertion planning. Systematic scheduling would identify appropriate technology insertion points within longer development sequences, ensuring evolving capabilities incorporate relevant advances while maintaining program continuity. This forward-looking approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar planning for its own modernization efforts, where coordinated technology integration proved more effective than either ignoring advances or disrupting programs for every new development. 4. Resource alignment programming. Comprehensive planning would align capability development with resource availability through realistic multi-year projections, preventing initiative resource mismatches while ensuring priority capabilities receive necessary support. This pragmatic approach draws on Pakistan's extensive experience developing similar resource alignment for its own capability development, where realistic funding planning proved essential for preventing program disruption or wasted initial investment. 5. Islamic Values Alignment. Unique to this alliance, roadmap development would explicitly verify alignment with Islamic principles regarding proportionality, legitimate security, purposes, and ethical application, ensuring capability development serves appropriate defensive requirements rather than excessive militarization. This distinctive approach demonstrates how religious principles provide meaningful guidance for security development while distinguishing the alliance from purely interest-based military organizations. This capability development roadmap creation establishes coherent, sustainable improvement direction through systematic planning rather than disjointed initiatives responding to individual exercise observations. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar roadmaps for its own force improvement despite resource constraints, where coherent direction proved essential for cumulative capability enhancement rather than scattered efforts producing limited strategic improvement despite significant investment. The approach reflects Pakistan's strategic tradition emphasizing quality capabilities in priority domains through deliberate development rather than reactive acquisition or haphazard modernization. Multinational development integration. Beyond roadmap creation, the alliance would implement sophisticated approaches for integrating development across diverse member nations. 1. Capability. Comparative advantage specialization. Development responsibilities would be distributed according to member state specialties, industrial capabilities, technological expertise, and resource availability rather than duplicating efforts across multiple nations. This efficient approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing specialized capabilities within its own joint force, where domain-focused excellence proved more effective than attempting identical development across all components regardless of comparative advantage. 2. Technology transfer framework implementation. Formal mechanisms would govern technology sharing between member states, enabling capability dissemination while respecting intellectual property, security limitations, and industrial concerns. This balanced approach draws on Pakistan's experience managing similar technology transfers in its partnerships with China and other allies, where appropriate sharing frameworks proved essential for collective capability enhancement while maintaining necessary protections. 3. Joint development program establishment. Selected capabilities would be developed through formal multinational programs with shared funding, distributed work allocation, and collaborative management rather than national development followed by transfer. This integrated approach draws on Pakistan's growing experience in joint development initiatives where collaborative programs often proved more effective than either independent development or direct acquisition for capability ownership and sustainability. 4. Complementary capability coordination. Development planning would deliberately create complementary capabilities across member states, where different national contributions combine into comprehensive alliance capability rather than redundant development of identical systems. This synergistic approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing complementary capabilities within its own joint force, where coordinated specialization proved more effective than attempting comprehensive capability in each component. 5. Islamic burden sharing principles. Unique to this alliance, development responsibility distribution would incorporate Islamic principles regarding proportional obligation according to capability, mutual assistance requirements, and equitable contribution expectations. This distinctive approach demonstrates how religious principles provide practical guidance for complex resource distribution questions while enhancing development sustainability through perceived fairness. This multinational development integration transforms individual national efforts into coherent alliance capability enhancement through sophisticated coordination mechanisms. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience managing capability development across its own joint force and through international partnerships, where integrated approaches proved more effective than parallel national efforts for achieving comprehensive capability within resource constraints. The approach reflects lessons from the May 2025 crisis, where complementary capabilities across domains and allies proved more effective than redundant development regardless of individual system sophistication. Implementation monitoring system. Effective improvement requires sophisticated monitoring systems tracking progress, identifying challenges, and enabling adaptation throughout development implementation. 1. System Milestone Tracking Framework. A comprehensive would monitor progress against established development milestones, providing timely awareness of schedule variance, technical challenges, and implementation. Progress. This systematic tracking draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar frameworks for its own capability programs, where milestone monitoring proved essential for timely management intervention before problems became irreversible. 2. Regular capability assessment. Periodic evaluation would assess developing capabilities against established requirements through structured testing, technical measurement, and operational validation rather than merely monitoring programmatic progress. This results-focused approach draws on Pakistan's experience implementing similar assessment for its own capability development, where actual performance verification often revealed discrepancies between program status and operational effectiveness. 3. Resource utilization monitoring. Sophisticated tracking would monitor resource consumption against projections, identifying efficiency opportunities, potential shortfalls, and allocation adjustments needed for optimal development progress. This detailed monitoring draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar tracking for its own programs, where resource management proved particularly critical given optimization. 4. Limited availability requiring careful risk management integration. Continuous assessment would identify emerging risks to capability development, including technical challenges, resource constraints, requirement changes, and external factors, enabling proactive mitigation rather than reactive response. This forward-looking approach draws on Pakistan's experience implementing similar risk management for its own development programs, where early identification proved essential for effective resolution before program impact became severe. 5. Islamic accountability implementation. Unique to this alliance, monitoring would incorporate Islamic principles regarding stewardship, transparency, and accountability in resource utilization, enhancing conventional program management with religious obligation regarding proper management of collective resources. This distinctive approach demonstrates how religious principles enhance military effectiveness through moral framework encouraging responsible development implementation. This implementation monitoring system transforms development plans into actual capability delivery through sophisticated tracking, enabling management intervention before problems become irreversible. The implementation draws on Pakistan's extensive experience managing complex capability programs despite resource constraints, where effective monitoring proved essential for successful delivery within limited funding availability. The approach reflects Pakistan's military culture, emphasizing results rather than merely activity, ensuring capability development actually produces operational effectiveness rather than merely programmatic compliance. Conclusion: from theoretical capability to validated readiness. The Exercise and Validation Program transforms the Muslim security architecture from theoretical capability to demonstrated readiness through progressive complexity. Development, rigorous certification, systematic lessons collection, comprehensive gap identification, and structured improvement planning. This transformation creates genuine security capability validated through realistic testing rather than merely assumed effectiveness based on organizational structures or equipment procurement. Pakistan's leadership of this program would draw on its unique qualifications spanning sophisticated exercise development, rigorous evaluation methodologies, systematic lessons processes, requirements-based capability planning, and resource-constrained improvement implementation. The approach would balance Islamic principles of excellence through discipline with modern military validation methodologies, creating proven capabilities that address contemporary challenges while maintaining authentic Islamic character. The Exercise and Validation Program directly addresses several critical security challenges facing the Muslim world. By testing capabilities through realistic scenarios, the architecture develops genuine deterrence against external military interventions through demonstrated rather than merely declared capability. Through systematic gap identification and prioritized improvement, the alliance addresses technological dependencies that create strategic vulnerabilities while developing indigenous capabilities aligned with specific security requirements. By implementing comprehensive lessons learned systems, the alliance transforms experience into continuous improvement essential for adapting to evolving threat environments. Most fundamentally, the Exercise and Validation Program converts potential into actual capability through rigorous testing. That reveals genuine readiness rather than merely assumed effectiveness. The resulting credibility implements the Quranic guidance to persevere and endure and remain stationed through practical readiness development rather than merely organizational establishment. By establishing Pakistan's central role in this validation, building on its sophisticated understanding of both Islamic principles and modern military requirements, the process institutionalizes the natural leadership qualification demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis when Pakistan's military excellence provided model for the broader Muslim world. The validated capabilities established through this process would provide the credible deterrence necessary for the Muslim world's security in an increasingly challenging international environment. This foundation, combining spiritual principles with rigorous testing, would enable the Muslim world to exercise defensive capabilities commensurate with its size and importance rather than accepting vulnerable fragmentation. Through this exercise and validation program, Pakistan would fulfill its historic role as the guardian that develops genuine rather than merely theoretical capability through qualitative excellence guided by Islamic principles and implemented with sophisticated military professionalism. Chapter 79. Full Operational Capability Achievement. And prepare against them whatever you are able of power and of steeds of war by which you may terrify the enemy of Allah and your enemy and others besides them whom you do not know but Allah knows. Quran 8 hours 60 minutes. Following progressive capability development, exercise validation, and systematic improvement, the Muslim security architecture reaches its culminating phase, achievement of full operational capability, FOC. This milestone represents the transition from developing organization to combat-ready alliance capable of executing its core missions with demonstrated effectiveness. The Quranic injunction to prepare whatever you are able of power finds its contemporary fulfillment in this phase, where theoretical capabilities become genuine deterrent power through comprehensive readiness. This chapter examines how Pakistan would lead the alliance's achievement of full operational capability, applying both Islamic principles of comprehensive preparation and modern military readiness methodologies to create security capabilities that protect the Muslim world's interests while establishing credible deterrence against potential adversaries. Comprehensive Assessment. Alliance capability. The foundation for declaring full operational capability lies in rigorous assessment, verifying that established capabilities truly meet operational requirements through objective evaluation rather than aspirational declaration. Strategic mission capability verification. The assessment begins with comprehensive verification that alliance capabilities truly enable execution of core strategic missions. 1. Mission Essential Task Validation. Systematic evaluation would verify capability to execute all identified mission essential tasks across different operation types, confirming practical ability rather than merely theoretical capacity. This validation draws on Pakistan's experience conducting similar assessment for its own forces, where task-focused evaluation proved more effective than generic capability reviews for determining actual operational readiness. 2. Scenario-based capability testing. Capabilities would undergo assessment through realistic scenarios specifically designed to test mission execution under challenging conditions rather than idealized environments. This practical approach draws on Pakistan's military tradition, emphasizing realistic evaluation, where capabilities demonstrated under difficult conditions proved more reliable indicators of actual readiness than performance in controlled settings. 3. Graduated readiness level verification. Assessment would confirm appropriate forces have achieved designated readiness levels across the tiered response system, from immediate reaction capabilities through longer-term reinforcement capacity. This structured verification draws on Pakistan's experience managing similar readiness systems for its own forces, where verified rather than declared readiness proved essential for genuine operational capability. For command effectiveness evaluation, comprehensive assessment would verify alliance command structures can effectively plan, direct, and control multinational operations across different mission types and operational environments. This evaluation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated understanding of command requirements demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis, where command effectiveness proved as important as physical capabilities for operational success. 5. Islamic Defense Obligation Fulfillment. Unique to this alliance, assessment would verify capabilities fulfill Islamic requirements regarding defensive preparation, community protection responsibilities, and proportional security development. This distinctive evaluation demonstrates how religious principles provide meaningful standards for security capabilities while connecting contemporary readiness to spiritual obligations. This strategic mission capability verification establishes that alliance capabilities truly enable required operations through demonstrated performance rather than organizational existence or equipment possession. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience conducting similar validation for its own forces, where mission-focused assessment proved essential for identifying genuine capability versus merely theoretical readiness. The approach reflects Pakistan's military culture, emphasizing honest evaluation as foundation for security rather than exaggerated claims, creating false confidence quickly exposed during actual operations. Technical system integration confirmation. Beyond mission capability, comprehensive assessment requires verification that technical systems function as integrated capabilities rather than merely coexisting components. 1. Multi-domain integration testing. Rigorous evaluation would verify functionality across domain boundaries including land-air coordination, cyber-physical synchronization, and information kinetic integration. This comprehensive testing draws on Pakistan's growing experience in multi-domain operations demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis, where domain integration proved decisive for achieving strategic effects despite resource constraints. 2. Communication interoperability verification. Detailed testing would confirm alliance communication systems enable effective information exchange across different national equipment types, security classification levels, and operational environments. This verification draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar interoperability for its joint forces comprising diverse equipment from multiple sources, where communication compatibility proved essential yet challenging prerequisite for effective operations. 3. Intelligence sharing functionality assessment. Specialized evaluation would verify intelligence systems effectively collect, process, analyze, and disseminate information across the alliance while maintaining appropriate security protections. This assessment draws on Pakistan's sophisticated intelligence methodology where information sharing effectiveness directly impacts operational outcomes through enhanced decision quality. For identification system reliability testing, critical evaluation would verify identification systems prevent fratricidal engagements through reliable discrimination between friendly, hostile, and neutral entities across different platforms and environments. This testing draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for its own joint operations, where identification reliability directly impacts both operational effectiveness and force protection. 5. Technical redundancy verification. Comprehensive assessment would confirm critical systems maintain functionality despite component failure, hostile action, or environmental challenges through effective backup capabilities and alternative paths. This verification draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar resilience for its own systems operating in contested environments where adversaries specifically target technical capabilities. This technical system integration confirmation evaluation establishes that alliance human systems function as effectively as technical components through demonstrated performance under realistic conditions. The implementation draws on Pakistan's extensive multinational operation experience, where organizational factors often proved more challenging than technical integration despite receiving less systematic attention during development. The approach reflects Pakistan's sophisticated understanding that military effectiveness ultimately depends on human organizations effectively employing technical systems rather than merely possessing advanced equipment. Readiness. Implementation. Reporting system. Achieving full operational capability requires more than initial assessment. It demands institutionalized systems providing continuous readiness awareness through systematic reporting and evaluation. Multi-level readiness measurement. The alliance would implement sophisticated readiness measurement across multiple levels from individual units through entire capability systems. 1. Standardized readiness criteria development. Common standards would be established for evaluating readiness across different force types, national contingents, and capability domains, creating consistent measurement rather than divergent national approaches. These standardized criteria draw on Pakistan's experience developing similar standards for its own forces, where consistent measurement proved essential for meaningful comparison and aggregate assessment. 2. Personnel equipment training integration. Readiness measurement would integrate personnel availability, equipment serviceability, and training currency into composite assessment rather than viewing dimensions separately, reflecting actual operational capability rather than isolated metrics. This integrated approach draws on Pakistan's military readiness methodology, where capability requires all dimensions simultaneously rather than averaging across strong and weak components. 3. Mission-specific readiness evaluation. Measurement would assess readiness against specific mission requirements rather than generic standards, recognizing different operations require different capability combinations and therefore distinct readiness assessments. This tailored approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar mission-focused evaluation for its own forces, where specific readiness for likely scenarios proved more valuable than general ratings for measuring actual operational capability. 4. Islamic personnel readiness integration. Unique to this alliance, readiness assessment would incorporate spiritual and moral dimensions alongside technical preparation, recognizing the Prophet Muhammad's emphasis on comprehensive readiness including spiritual aspects. This distinctive approach demonstrates how Islamic principles enhance military effectiveness through holistic readiness beyond merely material preparation. 5. Degraded capability assessment. Beyond optimal functionality, measurement would specifically assess capability under degraded communications and equipment limitations, conditions leadership losses, reflecting, including casualties, realistic operational environments. This robust approach draws on Pakistan's military experience, where performance under challenge proved more indicative of actual capability than functioning under ideal conditions. This multi-level readiness measurement creates comprehensive awareness of actual operational capability through sophisticated assessment rather than simplistic reporting. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar systems for its own forces operating under resource constraints, where accurate readiness awareness proved essential for effective resource allocation, ensuring critical capabilities maintained required readiness despite limited resources. The approach reflects Pakistan's military culture, emphasizing honest assessment as foundation for security planning rather than inflated reporting, creating false confidence with potentially catastrophic consequences during actual operations. Automated reporting architecture. Beyond measurement criteria, effective readiness awareness requires sophisticated systems collecting, processing, and presenting information through efficient architecture. 1. Digital reporting system implementation. An integrated digital architecture would be established, enabling efficient information collection, automated analysis, and timely dissemination across alliance headquarters and member states. This modern approach draws on Pakistan's growing experience developing similar digital systems for its own forces, where automated reporting significantly enhanced both accuracy and timeliness compared to traditional manual processes. 2. Real-time status visualization. Sophisticated display systems would present readiness information through intuitive visual formats, enabling rapid comprehension of complex status across multiple dimensions and organizational levels. This visualization approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for its own command centers, where effective information presentation proved as important as collection for enabling quality decisions, particularly under time pressure. 3. Trend analysis integration. Beyond current status, automated systems would identify trends, patterns, and potential future states through analytical algorithms applied to time series readiness data. This forward-looking approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar predictive capabilities for its own forces, where trend identification often allowed preemptive intervention before readiness degradation reached critical levels. For alert threshold implementation, automated mechanisms would generate notifications when readiness metrics breach predetermined thresholds, ensuring leadership awareness of significant changes without requiring continuous monitoring. This exception-based approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar alerting for its own command systems, where focused attention on deviations proved more effective than attempting comprehensive continuous awareness across all parameters. 5. Security accessibility balance. The reporting architecture would implement sophisticated security protecting sensitive information while enabling appropriate access across alliance elements through multi-level classification and compartmented access controls. This balanced approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar systems for its own forces, where excessive security sometimes proved as problematic as insufficient protection by preventing legitimate information access necessary for effective operations. This automated reporting architecture transforms readiness measurement from labor-intensive process to efficient system, providing timely awareness through modern information technology. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar automation for its own forces despite resource constraints, where digital systems proved cost-effective. Through enhanced decision quality despite initial investment requirements. The approach reflects Pakistan's growing emphasis on information technology as force multiplier, enabling more effective capability employment through superior awareness disadvantages. Despite numerical readiness accountability framework or material. Beyond measurement and reporting, effective readiness requires clear accountability, ensuring required capabilities remain available through formal responsibility assignment. 1. Command responsibility formalization. Explicit responsibility for readiness would be assigned to specific command positions at each organizational level, establishing clear accountability for maintaining required capability. This formal assignment draws on Pakistan's military tradition of command responsibility, where clear accountability proved more effective than distributed responsibility for ensuring sustained readiness. 2. Regular readiness review implementation. Structured review processes would systematically evaluate readiness status at multiple organizational levels through formal boards with documented findings and directed actions. This disciplined approach draws on Pakistan's experience implementing similar reviews for its own forces, where regular high-level attention proved essential for preventing gradual readiness degradation through competing priorities. 3. Readiness inspection program development. An independent inspection system would verify reported readiness through periodic unannounced evaluation, providing objective assessment unconstrained by reporting chain incentives. This verification approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar inspection capabilities for its own forces, where independent assessment often revealed discrepancies between reported and actual readiness requiring correction. 4. Consequence management integration. Formal mechanisms would address identified readiness shortfalls through required action development, resource allocation, and progress tracking until capability restoration. This follow-through approach draws on Pakistan's experience implementing similar consequence management for its own forces, where structured correction proved essential for translating awareness into actual improvement rather than merely documented concerns. 5. Islamic stewardship principles. Unique to this alliance, accountability would incorporate Islamic concepts regarding stewardship responsibility, covenant fulfillment, and mutual obligation beyond merely organizational requirements. This distinctive approach demonstrates how religious principles enhance military effectiveness through moral frameworks, strengthening accountability beyond formal mechanisms alone. This readiness accountability framework transforms awareness into sustained capability through clear responsibility and structured processes. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar accountability for its own forces, where formal mechanisms proved essential for maintaining readiness despite resource constraints, competing priorities, and operational demands. The approach reflects Pakistan's military culture emphasizing commander responsibility for force readiness as fundamental leadership obligation rather than merely administrative function or secondary consideration to current operations. Sustainment and logistics validation. Achievement of full operational capability requires verification that forces can not merely deploy but sustain operations through validated logistics systems, enabling persistent rather than merely initial capability. Logistics system integration verification. The foundation of sustainment validation lies in verifying logistics systems function as integrated capabilities across national boundaries. 1. Multinational logistics interoperability testing. Comprehensive evaluation would verify logistics systems from different member states effectively interface through compatible procedures, documentation systems, and material handling capabilities. This interoperability testing draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for its joint logistics, where procedural compatibility often proved as important as technical standardization for effective support. 2. End-to-end supply chain validation. Detailed testing would verify complete functionality from requirement identification through sourcing, transportation, delivery, and consumption tracking across the entire logistics process rather than merely isolated segments. This comprehensive approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar validation for its own supply chains, where end-to-end testing often revealed integration failures not apparent during component verification. 3. Cross-border movement capability. Specific evaluation would verify ability to move personnel, equipment, and supplies across international boundaries through established diplomatic clearances, customs procedures, and transportation arrangements. This practical testing draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities through bilateral arrangements, where administrative processes often proved more challenging than physical transportation for international movement. 4. Host nation support integration. Structured assessment would verify effective integration of host nation support capabilities including infrastructure access, local procurement, and transportation assistance through established agreements and implementation mechanisms. This validation draws on Pakistan's experience utilizing similar support during United Nations operations, where effective host nation integration significantly enhanced deployment and sustainment capabilities beyond organic resources alone. 5. Islamic logistics requirements. Unique to this alliance, verification would confirm logistics systems accommodate religious requirements including halal food provision, prayer opportunity maintenance during operations, and appropriate facilities for religious observance. This distinctive validation demonstrates how Islamic principles integrate with military functions through practical arrangements enhancing soldier welfare and spiritual well-being alongside physical sustainment. This logistics system integration verification establishes that alliance forces can maintain operations beyond initial deployment through effective sustainment regardless of geographic location or operational duration. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for its own forces operating at extended distances from established bases, where logistics often prove decisive for operational sustainability despite receiving less attention than combat capabilities. The approach reflects Pakistan's military understanding that combat power ultimately depends on sustainment systems enabling persistent operations rather than merely initial deployment capability regardless of combat system sophistication. Resource sharing implementation. Beyond basic logistics, full operational capability requires sophisticated resource sharing enabling optimal utilization across the alliance rather than isolated national sustainment. 1. Common user logistics implementation. Formal systems would be established enabling efficient resource utilization through shared stocks, facilities, and transportation assets rather than duplicate national systems. This efficient approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar arrangements for its joint operations, where common user logistics significantly enhanced efficiency through reduced duplication despite coordination requirements. 2. Mutual support agreement activation. Formal bilateral and multilateral support agreements would be implemented with verified functionality enabling resource exchange between member states through established procedures, compensation mechanisms, and priority systems. This structured approach draws on Pakistan's experience utilizing similar agreements with key partners, where formalized arrangements proved more reliable than ad hoc cooperation, particularly during contingency operations. 3. Strategic resource pooling. Critical low-density resources would be managed through alliance-level pooling systems enabling priority allocation according to operational requirements rather than merely national availability. This collaborative approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar pooling for its own scarce resources, where centralized management proved more effective than distributed control for maximizing operational impact from limited capabilities. For Islamic resource sharing principles, unique to this alliance, resource sharing would explicitly incorporate Islamic principles regarding mutual assistance obligations, equitable distribution during scarcity, and priority to frontline forces facing imminent threat. This distinctive approach demonstrates how religious principles provide practical guidance for complex resource allocation decisions while enhancing sharing willingness through moral foundation. 5. Burden sharing verification. Comprehensive assessment would verify equitable distribution of sustainment responsibilities across member states according to established agreements, capability commitments, and proportional obligations. This verification draws on Pakistan's experience managing similar burden sharing in multinational operations, where perceived fairness proved as important as technical efficiency for sustainable cooperation. This resource-sharing implementation transforms individual national logistics into collective sustainment capability through sophisticated cooperation mechanisms. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar sharing arrangements despite resource limitations, where collaborative approaches enhanced overall capability beyond what individual efforts could achieve through more efficient resource utilization. The approach reflects Pakistan's strategic tradition of maximizing effectiveness from available resources through optimal employment rather than merely seeking additional resources regardless of utilization efficiency. Endurance and persistence validation. Full operational capability requires verifying alliance forces can maintain operations over extended durations through demonstrated endurance beyond initial deployment capability. 1. Extended operations validation. Comprehensive testing would verify capability to maintain operations beyond initial deployment through exercises specifically designed to test sustainment over extended durations rather than merely initial effectiveness. This endurance focus draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar validation for its own forces, where extended operations often revealed sustainability challenges not apparent during shorter activities. 2. Rotation and replacement system testing. Detailed evaluation would verify systems for rotating personnel, replacing equipment, and regenerating capabilities over prolonged operations without significant capability gaps during transitions. This continuity testing draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar systems for its extended counter-terrorism operations, where operational persistence required effective rotation mechanisms beyond initial deployment capability. 3. Reconstitution capability verification. Specific assessment would verify ability to reconstitute forces following employment through established recovery, maintenance, retraining, and resupply systems enabling subsequent operations without prolonged regeneration periods. This verification draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for its forces frequently engaged in operations, where reconstitution effectiveness directly impacted sustained availability for sequential deployments. 4. Operational sustainment under adversity. Challenging scenarios would verify sustainment capability under realistic conditions including interdiction attempts, infrastructure limitations, and resource constraints rather than merely ideal environments. This realistic testing draws on Pakistan's military experience where logistics under adversity proved more indicative of actual capability than performance under optimal conditions without opposition or constraints. 5. Islamic perseverance integration. Unique to this alliance, endurance validation would incorporate Islamic concepts regarding steadfastness, sabr, persistence through hardship, and spiritual resilience alongside material sustainment. This distinctive approach demonstrates how religious principles enhance military effectiveness through moral frameworks strengthening determination beyond merely physical sustainment. This endurance and persistence validation establishes alliance capability for sustained operations rather than merely initial deployment through demonstrated performance over extended durations. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar validation for its own forces frequently engaged in prolonged operations, where endurance proved as important as initial effectiveness for operational success, particularly in counterinsurgency and territorial defense scenarios. The approach reflects Pakistan's military understanding that strategic effectiveness ultimately depends on persistent capability rather than merely initial impact regardless of force, sophistication, or technical advantage. Crisis decision-making rehearsal. Achievement of full operational capability requires verified decision processes enabling effective leadership under crisis conditions through demonstrated performance during realistic rehearsals. Strategic Decision Exercise Program. The alliance would implement sophisticated exercises specifically testing strategic decision-making under crisis conditions. 1. Political military decision simulation. Specialized exercises would test integrated political and military decision processes through scenarios requiring coordination across alliance governance structures, member state authorities, and military command elements. These simulations draw on Pakistan's experience developing similar exercises for its own strategic leadership, where political-military integration often proved more challenging than either civilian or military decision-making in isolation. 2. Time-compressed decision scenarios. Dedicated exercises would evaluate decision quality under severe time constraints through scenarios, progressively reducing available time while increasing complexity and consequence. This stress testing draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar validation for its own command systems, where decision performance under extreme time pressure revealed capabilities and limitations not apparent during deliberate planning. 3. Incomplete information decision evaluation. Realistic scenarios would assess decision effectiveness with deliberately limited, contradictory, or ambiguous information, testing judgment quality rather than merely analytical processes. This uncertainty-focused approach draws on Pakistan's military experience where decision-making despite information gaps proved more indicative of leadership effectiveness than performance with complete situational understanding. For escalation management rehearsal, specialized exercises would test crisis escalation management through scenarios requiring calibrated responses, deliberate signaling, and escalation control while maintaining deterrence credibility. This sophisticated rehearsal draws on Pakistan's extensive experience managing similar escalation challenges during recurrent crises with India, where calibration precision directly impacted strategic outcomes through escalation avoidance while maintaining position. Unique to this. 5. Islamic Decision Principles Application. Alliance decision exercises would incorporate Islamic ethical frameworks regarding proportionality, distinction between combatants and non-combatants, and justice requirements beyond merely strategic calculus. This distinctive approach demonstrates how religious principles provide practical guidance for complex security decisions while ensuring responses remain consistent with Islamic ethics regardless of operational pressure. This strategic decision exercise program establishes verified decision capability through demonstrated performance rather than merely established processes or theoretical frameworks. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing similar validation for its own strategic decision systems, where actual performance under realistic conditions often revealed capabilities and limitations not apparent from procedural review alone. The approach reflects lessons from the May 2025 crisis, where Pakistan's decision quality under extreme pressure demonstrated the value of realistic rehearsal despite the impossibility of precisely anticipating actual crisis circumstances. Multi-level crisis communication testing. Effective crisis management requires validated communication systems enabling coordinated response across the alliance through demonstrated functionality under stress conditions. 1. Vertical communication validation. Comprehensive testing would verify effective information flow between strategic, operational, and tactical levels through exercises specifically stressing communication across command echelons. This multi-level validation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for its own command system, where cross-level communication often proved more challenging than horizontal coordination at similar echelons. 2. Cross-national coordination verification. Dedicated exercises would test communication between alliance structures and national authorities through scenarios requiring rapid consultation, information sharing, and coordinated messaging across sovereign boundaries. This multinational validation draws on Pakistan's experience managing similar coordination during coalition operations, where national-multinational interface often created friction despite established procedures requiring deliberate validation. 3. Strategic communication synchronization. Specialized testing would verify alignment between public statements, diplomatic messaging, and military actions through scenarios requiring coordinated communication across different instruments of power. This synchronization validation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing similar capabilities demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis, where message discipline across different channels significantly impacted crisis trajectory through perception management. 4. Technical redundancy under stress. Realistic scenarios would verify communication system functionality despite deliberate degradation, interference attempts, and infrastructure limitations through progressive challenges exceeding normal operating conditions. This resilience testing draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar validation for its own command communications, where performance unique to this under adversity proved more indicative of actual capability than functioning under ideal conditions. 5. Islamic Unity Messaging Integration Alliance. Communication testing would verify capability to demonstrate Islamic unity principles through coordinated messaging emphasizing shared values, collective defense commitment, and brotherhood beyond merely technical cooperation. This distinctive approach demonstrates how religious principles enhance strategic communication through moral frameworks strengthening message organizational statements. Credibility beyond merely. This multilevel crisis communication testing establishes verified coordination capability through demonstrated performance under realistic conditions. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar validation for its own crisis communication systems, where effective coordination across different governmental elements and military echelons proved essential for crisis management, particularly under severe time constraints. The approach reflects Pakistan's sophisticated understanding that strategic success during crises often depends more on communication effectiveness than merely military capability, particularly in situations where perception management directly impacts escalation dynamics. Nuclear consultation rehearsal. The most sensitive dimension of crisis decision-making involves nuclear consultation processes requiring specially designed validation ensuring effectiveness without compromising operational security. 1. Graduated alert consultation testing. Specialized exercises would validate consultation mechanisms at different alert levels through scenarios progressively escalating from normal posture through heightened readiness to crisis conditions. This graduated testing draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing similar validation for its own nuclear forces, where consultation effectiveness at intermediate alert states often proved more challenging than either normal or maximum readiness situations. 2. Time-sensitive decision protocols. Dedicated validation would test nuclear consultation under extreme time pressure through scenarios requiring rapid coordination between Pakistan's National Command Authority and alliance leadership. This time-constrained testing draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar protocols for its own nuclear decision system, where compressed decision timelines created unique challenges requiring specialized procedures beyond conventional crisis management. 3. Communication security under duress. Specific scenarios would verify nuclear consultation communication security despite deliberate interference attempts, infrastructure degradation, and operational challenges through progressive system stress beyond normal operating conditions. This security validation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for its strategic forces, where communication protection receives extraordinary emphasis given consequent severity of potential compromise. 4. De-escalation coordination testing. Specialized exercises would validate nuclear de-escalation consultation. Unique to this, through scenarios requiring coordinated reduction from elevated alert levels while maintaining necessary security and deterrence credibility. This de-escalation focus draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for crisis termination, where controlled de-escalation often proved more challenging than initial escalation management, particularly regarding synchronization across different capability domains. 5. Islamic Ethical Framework Application Alliance. nuclear consultation would explicitly incorporate Islamic ethical principles regarding extreme force limitation, non-combatant protection obligations, and last resort requirements beyond merely strategic calculation. This distinctive approach demonstrates how religious principles provide meaningful guidance even for the most challenging contemporary security questions, drawing on Pakistani religious scholars' work integrating Islamic ethics with nuclear deterrent requirements. This nuclear consultation rehearsal establishes verified coordination capability for the alliance's most sensitive dimension through carefully designed validation that maintains absolute Pakistani sovereign control over nuclear forces while enabling appropriate alliance consultation. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing nuclear management systems that balance security, stability, and sovereignty within an Islamic ethical framework. The approach reflects Pakistan's unique qualification for Muslim world security leadership through its demonstrated capability managing nuclear deterrent responsibly despite extreme security challenges, providing extended deterrence benefits through coordination mechanisms validated under realistic conditions. Public demonstration of capabilities. Achievement of full operational capability requires not merely internal validation but public demonstration establishing credible deterrence through visible evidence of alliance effectiveness. Strategic messaging through demonstration. The alliance would implement sophisticated approaches for communicating capabilities through carefully designed public demonstrations. 1. Phased capability revelation. A deliberate program would progressively demonstrate alliance capabilities through carefully sequenced public exercises revealing sufficient capability to establish credibility while maintaining appropriate operational security. This calibrated approach draws on Pakistan's experience managing similar revelation for its own strategic capabilities, where demonstration precision directly impacted deterrence effectiveness through credibility establishment without unnecessary provocation or security compromise. 2. Multi-domain capability display. Comprehensive demonstrations would showcase capabilities across different operational domains including conventional forces, special operations, cyber capabilities, and information operations through integrated exercises visible to international observers. This balanced approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar demonstrations for its own capabilities, where comprehensive display proved more effective than unique to this. Single domain focus for establishing credible deterrence against diverse threat vectors. 3. Technical sophistication evidence. Carefully designed demonstrations would provide evidence of alliance technical capabilities through specific exercises highlighting advanced systems, sophisticated tactics, and innovative approaches beyond merely numerical strength. This quality-focused approach draws on Pakistan's experience establishing deterrence despite numerical disadvantage through demonstrated technical excellence, where capability quality often proved more important than quantity for credibility establishment. For readiness verification events, public exercises would demonstrate actual readiness through non-notice activations, rapid deployments, and emergency response scenarios validating capability to transition quickly from peacetime to crisis posture. This readiness emphasis draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar demonstrations for its own forces, where verified rather than merely declared readiness proved essential for genuine deterrence effectiveness. 5. Islamic defensive posture emphasis. Unique to this alliance, public messaging would explicitly emphasize defensive orientation through demonstration scenarios focused on territorial protection, critical infrastructure security, and sacred site defense rather than offensive operations. This distinctive approach demonstrates the alliance's authentic Islamic character while establishing deterrence credibility without unnecessarily threatening potential adversaries. This strategic messaging through demonstration establishes credible deterrence through visible evidence rather than merely declared capabilities or organizational structures. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing similar demonstrations for its own deterrence, where calibrated revelation proved essential for establishing credibility while maintaining necessary security. The approach reflects Pakistan's understanding that effective deterrence ultimately depends on adversary perception of capability and resolve rather than merely actual capacity regardless of technical sophistication or numerical strength. International engagement strategy. Beyond demonstration, the alliance would implement comprehensive international engagement, enhancing capability awareness through structured interaction with external actors. 1. Observer program implementation. A formal program would enable selected international observers to witness alliance capabilities through structured observation opportunities during exercises, demonstrations, and capability displays. This transparent approach draws on Pakistan's experience hosting similar observers for its own exercises, where direct observation often proved more convincing than verbal descriptions or written reports for establishing capability credibility. 2. Military diplomacy activation. Systematic engagement would build international awareness through defense attaché briefings, military leadership consultations, and professional exchange programs with non-member states having security relationships with alliance members. This diplomatic approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar engagement for communicating its own capabilities, where professional military channels often provided more effective communication pathways than civilian diplomatic engagement. For technical capability understanding. 3. Regional security dialogue participation. Active participation in regional security forums, multilateral dialogues, and international conferences would establish alliance role and capabilities through formal presentations, informal consultations, and relationship development. This multilateral approach draws on Pakistan's experience utilizing similar forums for communicating its security perspectives, where participation often created understanding opportunities beyond bilateral engagement limitations, particularly with non-aligned states. 4. Strategic communication synchronization. Coordinated messaging across alliance members would ensure consistent capability description through harmonized public statements, aligned media engagement, and complementary official communications. This disciplined approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar coordination for multinational operations, where message consistency significantly enhanced credibility compared to divergent communications suggesting disunity or confusion. 5. Islamic security cooperation emphasis. Unique to this alliance, international engagement would explicitly position capabilities within Islamic security cooperation traditions, emphasizing defensive protection, proportional preparation, and security through strength rather than aggression or expansionism. This distinctive approach demonstrates the alliance's authentic character while establishing international understanding beyond merely technical capability assessment. This international engagement strategy transforms capability demonstration into widespread awareness through comprehensive interaction beyond merely public display. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing similar engagement for communicating its own capabilities to diverse international audiences, from potential adversaries to neutral observers. The approach reflects Pakistan's understanding that deterrence effectiveness ultimately depends on capability perception by multiple audiences, requiring tailored engagement strategies beyond merely visible demonstration regardless of actual capability sophistication. Media and public relations implementation. Public effective capability demonstration requires sophisticated media and relations approaches understanding across diverse audiences. 1. Ensuring accurate tiered media access program. A structured program would provide appropriate media access to alliance capabilities through graduated opportunities ranging from general coverage to detailed technical briefings based on media type, audience, and security considerations. This calibrated approach draws on Pakistan's experience managing similar media access for its own capabilities, where appropriate transparency proved more effective than either excessive secrecy or indiscriminate disclosure for establishing public understanding. 2. Digital capability presentation. Comprehensive digital content would communicate alliance capabilities through professionally produced videos, interactive presentations, and social media content optimized for different platforms and audience types. This modern approach draws on Pakistan's growing experience developing similar digital communication for its own security messaging, where platform-appropriate content significantly enhance reach and understanding compared to traditional media alone. 3. Technical explainer development. Specialized materials would explain alliance capabilities to non-technical audiences through accessible presentations translating military concepts into understandable terms without oversimplification or security compromise. This educational approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar materials for its own. Capability communication, where understanding enhancement often proved as important as mere awareness for establishing meaningful deterrence perception. For narrative framework implementation, a sophisticated narrative would position alliance capabilities within compelling context emphasizing defensive necessity, proportional development, and security contribution rather than merely technical specifications or organizational structures. This narrative approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar frameworks for communicating its own security requirements, where contextual understanding significantly enhanced capability legitimacy perception compared to isolated technical descriptions. Five, Islamic security communication. Unique to this alliance, media relations would explicitly connect capabilities to Islamic concepts regarding defensive preparation, community protection obligation, and security through strength as religious duty rather than merely strategic choice. This distinctive approach demonstrates the alliance's authentic character while enhancing capability legitimacy through religious framework resonating across the Muslim world. This media and public relations implementation transforms capability demonstration into public understanding through sophisticated communication beyond merely visibility or technical description. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar approaches for communicating its own capabilities to diverse audiences, where perception management proved an essential component of effective deterrence, particularly regarding capabilities where technical details necessarily remain classified despite general awareness. Requirements. The approach reflects Pakistan's sophisticated understanding that security effectiveness ultimately depends on how capabilities are perceived by multiple audiences, requiring tailored communication strategies beyond merely physical demonstration regardless of sophistication. Conclusion from developing actual technical organization to combat-ready alliance. The achievement of full operational capability transforms the Muslim security architecture from developing organization to combat-ready alliance through comprehensive capability assessment, implementation of readiness reporting systems, validation of sustainment capabilities, rehearsal of crisis decision processes, and public demonstration of operational effectiveness. This transformation creates genuine deterrent power through verified capabilities rather than merely declared readiness or organizational structures. Pakistan's leadership of this culminating phase would draw on its unique qualification spanning sophisticated readiness assessment methodologies, integrated reporting systems, logistics validation experience, crisis decision rehearsal expertise, and capability demonstration approaches. The implementation would balance Islamic principles of comprehensive preparation with modern military readiness methodologies, creating security capabilities that protect the Muslim world's interests while establishing credible deterrence against potential adversaries. The full operational capability achievement directly addresses several critical security challenges facing the Muslim world. By establishing verified capabilities through rigorous validation, the alliance creates credible deterrence against external military interventions through demonstrated rather than merely declared readiness. Through implementing comprehensive sustainment validation, the framework addresses logistics dependencies that create strategic vulnerabilities during extended operations. By rehearsing crisis decision processes through realistic exercises, the alliance demonstrates governance effectiveness essential for strategic credibility beyond merely physical capabilities. Most fundamentally, the full operational capability achievement converts the alliance from aspiration to reality through demonstrated performance verified through rigorous assessment rather than merely organizational establishment or equipment procurement. The resulting credibility implements the Quranic guidance to prepare whatever you are able of power through comprehensive capability development rather than merely symbolic or partial preparation. By establishing Pakistan's central role in this capability validation, particularly regarding nuclear consultation processes, the alliance institutionalizes the natural leadership qualification demonstrated during the May 2025 crisis when Pakistan's military excellence provided model for the broader Muslim world. The alliance's transition to full operational capability represents the fulfillment of the vision presented throughout this book, a security framework transforming the Muslim world's numerical mass into strategic weight through qualitative excellence guided by Islamic principles and implemented with sophisticated military professionalism. This transformation enables the Muslim world to exercise defensive capabilities commensurate with its size and importance in the increasingly challenging international environment of the mid-21st century. Through Pakistan's leadership, the alliance has developed the nuclear umbrella and conventional capabilities necessary for collective Muslim world security independent from external powers or compromising arrangements that sacrifice core Islamic principles for illusory protection. Section C. Economic and Resource Foundations. Chapter 80. Defense Expenditure. Coordination. And prepare against them whatever you are able of power and of steeds of war by which you may terrify the enemy of Allah and your enemy. Quran 8 hours 60 minutes. Effective collective security requires more than organizational structures and political commitments. It demands sustainable financial foundation enabling capability development through equitable resource distribution. This chapter examines how the Muslim security architecture would implement sophisticated defense expenditure coordination through percentage-based commitment frameworks, equitable burden-sharing formulas, transparent budget governance, coordinated infrastructure investment, and collaborative research funding. The Quranic injunction to prepare whatever you are able of power provides both spiritual guidance and practical wisdom. Effective defense requires methodical resource allocation reflecting both capability requirements and available means. This chapter examines how Pakistan would lead the alliance's defense. Expenditure coordination, applying both Islamic principles of proportional contribution and modern financial management methodologies to create sustainable resource foundations addressing the Muslim world's critical security challenges through collective investment rather than duplicative individual efforts. Percentage. Framework. Of GDP commitment. The foundation of sustainable defense funding lies in clear, predictable commitment levels enabling both capability planning and domestic fiscal management through structured approaches. Graduated commitment structure. The alliance would implement a sophisticated graduated commitment structure balancing security requirements against diverse economic capabilities. 1. Tiered percentage framework. Rather than uniform contribution levels regardless of economic capacity, a graduated system would establish different percentage of GDP requirements based on national economic development, security environment, and resource availability. This equitable approach draws on Pakistan's experience managing its own defense budget within severe resource constraints, where targeted allocation proved more effective than attempting equal development across all security domains regardless of strategic priority. 2. Core member enhanced commitment. Nations serving as foundation members with leadership positions would contribute higher percentages reflecting their central roles and enhance benefits, establishing proportional relationship between influence and investment. This leadership responsibility alignment draws on Pakistan's experience as security leader for broader Muslim interests despite resource limitations, where priority allocation to critical capabilities proved essential for effective regional leadership beyond merely declaratory positions. 3. Specialization adjustment mechanism. Contribution requirements would incorporate adjustment for nations providing specialized capabilities of disproportionate value to collective security, recognizing qualitative contribution alongside purely financial metrics. This nuanced approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing specialized nuclear, missile, and intelligence capabilities, where focused excellence in critical domains proved more valuable than broader but mediocre capability development across all security dimensions. 4. Progressive implementation pathway, rather than immediate full compliance requirements potentially creating domestic economic disruption. Graduated implementation pathways would establish increasing contribution levels over multi-year periods, enabling sustainable adjustment. This practical approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing defense capabilities within resource constraints, where phased development proved more sustainable than attempting immediate capability establishment regardless of economic capacity. 5. Islamic Proportional Responsibility Principle. Unique to this alliance, contribution frameworks would explicitly incorporate Islamic principles regarding proportional obligation according to capability, establishing religious foundation alongside practical considerations. This distinctive approach draws on Islamic concepts where obligation corresponds to capacity rather than identical requirements. Regardless of ability, providing religious legitimacy, enhancing compliance beyond merely contractual commitment. This graduated commitment structure establishes clear, predictable funding foundations, enabling capability development through equitable resource distribution rather than uniform requirements regardless of economic reality. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience managing defense resource allocation within severe constraints, where strategic prioritization proved essential for maintaining security effectiveness despite limited funding availability. The approach reflects Pakistan's understanding that security requires sustainable resource foundations matching commitment levels to actual capabilities rather than aspirational targets, frequently creating compliance failures undermining collective planning reliability. Economic capacity assessment methodology. Beyond establishing percentage targets, the alliance would implement sophisticated economic assessment, ensuring contribution requirements reflect actual rather than nominal capabilities. 1. Comprehensive economic measurement. Assessment would incorporate multiple economic indicators beyond merely nominal GDP, including purchasing power parity, foreign exchange reserves, fiscal capacity, and debt burden, providing realistic measurement of actual contribution capability. This multidimensional approach draws on Pakistan's experience managing defense budgeting within complex economic constraints, where multiple factors beyond headline economic figures directly impacted actual resource availability for security investment. 2. Strategic resource endowment integration. Assessment would consider natural resource wealth including energy reserves, strategic minerals, and agricultural production capacity potentially available for security purposes beyond purely monetary metrics. This comprehensive approach draws on Pakistan's experience leveraging non-financial resources for security development, where strategic material sometimes proved more valuable than financial contribution, particularly during international restrictions limiting monetary transfers. 3. Implementation verification mechanisms. Beyond headline commitment figures, sophisticated monitoring would track actual implementation through expenditure verification, capability development assessment, and resource availability confirmation, ensuring commitments translate to actual security investment. This accountability approach draws on Pakistan's experience where demonstrated capability implementation proved more meaningful than declaratory commitments, frequently disconnected from actual resource allocation regardless of stated intentions. For the economic integration factor analysis, assessment would consider degree of economic integration with alliance partners, foreign dependency relationships, and external vulnerability potentially impacting actual resource availability during crises despite nominal economic capacity. This sophisticated analysis draws on Pakistan's experience where economic relationship patterns significantly impacted actual resource availability during security challenges, particularly when external pressures specifically targeted financial capabilities through sanctions or restrictions. 5. This Islamic economic assessment principles, unique to alliance, economic capacity measurement would incorporate Islamic principles regarding wealth measurement, legitimate resource utilization, and equitable assessment beyond merely Western economic frameworks. This distinctive approach draws on Islamic economic concepts where resource stewardship, wealth distribution responsibility, and mutual assistance obligation create different assessment foundations than purely materialistic measurement focusing exclusively on nominal wealth regardless of distribution or utilization patterns. This economic capacity assessment methodology establishes realistic contribution expectations through sophisticated analysis rather than simplistic numerical targets, frequently creating either implementation failure or domestic hardship, undermining alliance sustainability. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience managing defense resource allocation within complex economic environments, where realistic assessment proved essential for sustainable security development, avoiding both capability shortfalls from insufficient funding and economic disruption from excessive military expenditure beyond actual capacity. The approach reflects Pakistan's pragmatic understanding that effective security requires sustainable resource foundations, matching contribution requirements to genuine economic capacity rather than aspirational targets disconnected from implementation reality. Compliance monitoring and adjustment. Effective expenditure coordination requires sophisticated monitoring, ensuring actual implementation while enabling appropriate adjustment addressing changing circumstances. 1. Transparent reporting system implementation. A comprehensive reporting framework would track actual defense expenditure against commitment targets through standardized formats, regular submission requirements, and verification mechanisms, ensuring accurate understanding beyond merely declaratory compliance. This transparency approach draws on Pakistan's experience, where demonstrated expenditure proved more meaningful than announced intentions, frequently modified during actual implementation regardless of initial commitments. 2. Economic condition adjustment mechanism. Formal procedures would enable temporary contribution modification during genuine economic crises through established variance methodologies and request recovery protocols, planning assessment requirements distinguishing legitimate hardship from merely discretionary reprioritization. This flexibility approach draws on Pakistan's experience managing defense expenditure during economic challenges, where temporary adjustment sometimes proved necessary for long-term sustainability despite short-term capability impact. 3. Value-added contribution credit. Beyond monetary expenditure, formal mechanisms would recognize and credit non-financial contributions, including personnel provision, facility access, territorial positioning, and specialized capability development with particular alliance value. This comprehensive approach draws on Pakistan's experience, where non-monetary contributions, including geographic position, specialized capabilities, and personnel commitment, frequently provided security value beyond purely financial metrics, particularly regarding capabilities requiring specialized expertise beyond merely equipment procurement. 4. Underperformance consequence framework. Clear procedures would address persistent contribution shortfalls through graduated consequences, including enhanced transparency requirements, capability access limitations, and alliance position restrictions, providing compliance incentives beyond merely negative criticism. This accountability approach draws on Pakistan's experience in multinational security arrangements, where formal consequence mechanisms proved more effective for ensuring commitment fulfillment than merely reputational pressure, frequently insufficient for motivating genuine compliance. 5. Islamic accountability integration. Unique to this alliance, compliance monitoring would incorporate Islamic principles regarding covenant fulfillment obligation, mutual accountability responsibility, and transparent stewardship beyond merely contractual requirements. This distinctive approach draws on religious concepts, where commitment adherence represents spiritual obligation beyond purely political agreement, providing additional motivation for compliance beyond merely practical consequences alone. This compliance monitoring and adjustment framework establishes actual rather than merely nominal implementation through sophisticated oversight, while enabling appropriate flexibility addressing legitimate constraints. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience managing defense expenditure within unpredictable economic environments, where realistic adjustment mechanisms proved essential for maintaining long-term commitment viability despite short-term fluctuations, potentially disrupting rigid targets regardless of changing circumstances. The approach reflects Pakistan's pragmatic understanding that effective security requires sustainable resource foundations, matching actual expenditure to formal commitments through verification systems, ensuring planning reliability while accommodating genuine constraints through structured adjustment rather than undisclosed variance, creating unpredictable capability shortfalls. Burden sharing formula development. Beyond percentage commitments, sustainable collective security requires sophisticated burden-sharing mechanisms equitably distributing specific responsibilities according to comparative advantage and capability. Capability-based specialization approach. The alliance would implement specialized burden sharing recognizing different national strengths through targeted responsibility allocation. 1. Comparative advantage identification. Systematic assessment would identify specific national strengths across member states, including industrial capabilities, technological expertise, geographic advantages, and human capital excellence, creating foundation for specialized contribution rather than duplicate development across all members. This efficiency approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing specialized security capabilities within resource constraints, where focused excellence in selected domains proved more effective than attempting comprehensive development across all areas regardless of comparative advantage. 2. Lead nation framework implementation. Specific capability domains would receive dedicated lead nations with particular responsibility for development, standardization, and expertise provision based on demonstrated excellence in relevant areas. This specialization approach draws on Pakistan's experience providing leadership in specific security domains including nuclear deterrence, counterterrorism, and asymmetric warfare, where demonstrated excellence created natural leadership role beyond merely positional authority alone. 3. Then complementary capability development, rather duplicative development across all members. Burden sharing would emphasize complementary capabilities through coordinated specialization, creating comprehensive collective capacity through integration rather than redundant individual development. This efficiency approach draws on Pakistan's experience focusing on specialized excellence within joint operations, where capability integration proved more effective than attempting identical development across all components regardless of comparative advantage or resource efficiency. 4. Geographic responsibility distribution. Defense burdens would incorporate geographic positioning through specialized responsibility allocation, where territorial location creates particular security function advantages including forward presence, corridor control, or strategic depth provision. This tailored approach draws on Pakistan's experience leveraging its geographic position between Middle East, Central Asia, and South Asia, where location frequently provided strategic advantage beyond merely material capabilities alone, particularly regarding regional access and positioning. 5. Islamic specialization integration. Unique to this alliance, burden sharing would incorporate nations with particular religious significance through specialized responsibilities regarding sacred site protection, pilgrimage security, and Islamic heritage preservation beyond merely technical defense capabilities. This distinctive approach draws on Pakistan's recognition that Islamic identity creates special responsibilities transcending purely material security considerations, with religious obligations creating specific security requirements beyond conventional defense domains alone. This capability-based specialization approach establishes efficient collective regardless capability through complementary development rather than wasteful duplication across member states of comparative advantage. The implementation draws on Pakistan's sophisticated experience developing specialized capabilities within resource constraints, where targeted excellence proved more effective than attempting comprehensive development beyond actual capacity. The approach reflects Pakistan's strategic tradition of asymmetric capability development, focusing resources where maximum impact potential exists rather than diluting investment across all domains regardless of effectiveness potential or alliance contribution value. Financial operational burden balance. Beyond monetary contribution, comprehensive burden sharing requires sophisticated balance between financial and operational responsibilities. 1. Contribution type diversification. Rather than measuring burden sharing through purely financial metrics, comprehensive assessment would incorporate operational commitments including force provision, casualty acceptance, territorial access, and domestic political costs, providing balanced evaluation beyond merely monetary contribution. This multidimensional approach draws on Pakistan's experience where operational contributions including territorial positioning, personnel commitment, and domestic political capital frequently provided security value beyond purely financial metrics, particularly regarding complex operations requiring multiple contribution types beyond merely funding provision. Two, risk exposure equity framework. Burden sharing would explicitly incorporate security risk acceptance through formal recognition of threat exposure, target likelihood, and consequent severity, creating comprehensive assessment beyond purely resource measurement. This holistic approach draws on Pakistan's experience where frontline positioning against major threats created disproportionate security burden through risk exposure beyond merely financial contribution, particularly regarding nations directly neighboring hostile powers compared with geographically insulated members facing limited direct threat regardless of financial contribution level. 3. Personnel contribution valuation. Formal mechanisms would value personnel commitments through standardized assessment incorporating quantity, quality, specialization, and readiness level, creating equitable evaluation of human resource provision beyond purely equipment or financial metrics. This comprehensive approach draws on Pakistan's experience in United Nations and other multinational operations where personnel contribution quality frequently proved more valuable than purely financial contribution, particularly regarding specialized capabilities requiring extensive training and experience beyond merely equipment provision or funding allocation. 4. Host nation support recognition. Burden sharing assessment would formally recognize and value territory access, infrastructure provision, and local support arrangements, creating equitable credit for nations providing physical hosting essential for alliance operations. This balanced approach draws on Pakistan's experience providing territorial access for multinational security operations, where geographic hosting frequently created domestic political and sovereignty costs beyond purely financial dimensions, particularly when controversial operations generated local opposition despite strategic necessity. Five. Islamic concept of jihad integration. Unique to this alliance, burden sharing would incorporate Islamic principles regarding striving, jihad, through diverse means including financial contribution, mal, personal participation, nafs, and leadership provision, rari, beyond merely monetary measurement. This distinctive approach draws on classical Islamic concepts where security contribution encompasses multiple dimensions beyond purely financial metrics, providing religious framework enhancing contribution diversity recognition beyond conventional assessments, focusing exclusively on monetary provision regardless of other contribution forms. This financial operational burden balance establishes comprehensive contribution assessment through sophisticated measurement incorporating multiple dimensions rather than merely monetary metrics, frequently undervaluing critical non-financial contributions. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience in multinational security operations, where diverse contribution forms frequently provided essential capability beyond purely financial metrics, particularly regarding specialized functions requiring unique resources beyond merely funding provision. The approach reflects Pakistan's understanding that effective security requires multidimensional contribution recognition, valuing different contribution types according to actual security impact rather than purely monetary measurement, potentially creating inequitable assessment, undervaluing critical operational contributions despite limited financial capacity. Equitable formula calculation. The alliance would implement sophisticated calculation methodologies ensuring contribution equity across diverse member capabilities. 1. Multi-factor assessment implementation. Rather than simplistic single metric formulas, burden sharing would incorporate multiple factors including GDP percentage, population proportion, territorial size, threat exposure, and specialized capability provision through weighted calculation, providing comprehensive evaluation beyond one-dimensional measurement. This sophisticated approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing multifaceted assessment for its own security resource allocation, where multiple factors proved essential for equitable distribution, reflecting genuine security requirements beyond merely proportional economic allocation regardless of actual security needs. 2. 3. Dynamic adjustment mechanism. Burden-sharing formulas would incorporate periodic recalculation based on changing economic conditions, security environment evolution, and capability development progress, ensuring continued equity despite changing circumstances rather than static allocation regardless of developing conditions. This adaptive approach draws on Pakistan's experience managing defense resource allocation within evolving security environments, where periodic reassessment proved essential for maintaining appropriate distribution, matching changing requirements and capabilities, potentially creating significant variance from initial conditions over extended periods. Measurement standardization development. Comprehensive methodology would establish standardized measurement across diverse contribution types, including financial expenditure, force provision, and risk exposure, enabling equitable comparison through common metrics despite contribution type variation. This standardization approach draws on Pakistan's experience in multinational operations, where contribution comparison frequently required sophisticated conversion between different contribution types for equitable assessment beyond merely accepting diverse contributions without comparative evaluation. 4. Transparency enhancement implementation. Burden-sharing calculations would incorporate comprehensive transparency through methodology publication, input data verification, and calculation process clarity, ensuring formula legitimacy through understanding rather than merely result announcement without justification. Transparency. This open approach draws on Pakistan's experience, where contribution assessment legitimacy frequently depended on process. Transparency beyond merely outcome announcement, particularly regarding complex calculations, potentially creating unexpected results requiring clear justification for acceptance beyond merely authoritative declaration. 5. Islamic equity principle integration. Unique to this alliance, burden-sharing formulas would explicitly incorporate Islamic concepts regarding proportional responsibility, equitable distribution according to capability, and mutual support obligation beyond merely practical calculation. This distinctive approach draws on religious principles, where contribution equity represents spiritual obligation beyond purely practical arrangement, providing enhanced legitimacy through religious foundation beyond merely technical methodology alone, regardless of theological significance in Muslim societies where religious principles directly impact perceived fairness calculation. Beyond purely mathematical. This equitable formula calculation establishes genuine contribution balance through sophisticated methodology incorporating multiple dimensions rather than simplistic metrics, potentially creating perceived inequity, undermining alliance cohesion. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing resource allocation approaches within complex security environments, where sophisticated assessment proved essential for maintaining contribution acceptance, particularly when significant disparities existed between member capabilities, creating potential perception challenges without clear methodological justification. The approach reflects Pakistan's understanding that alliance sustainability ultimately depends on perceived contribution equity through transparent, comprehensive assessment. Methodology establishing clear relationship between capability and responsibility rather than arbitrary or opaque allocation, potentially creating perceived unfairness regardless of technical calculation sophistication. Common budget establishment and governance. Beyond individual national contributions, effective collective security requires common funding, enabling alliance-level capabilities through sophisticated budget establishment and transparent governance. Core capability common funding. The alliance would establish dedicated common budgets funding essential collective capabilities beyond individual national responsibility. 1. Headquarters infrastructure funding. Common budgets would finance alliance command facilities, communication networks, and support infrastructure, enabling effective multinational leadership beyond individual national capabilities or interests. This collective approach draws on Pakistan's experience in multinational operations where dedicated common facilities proved essential for effective command beyond merely using national headquarters, potentially creating actual or perceived bias toward hosting nation interests or procedures regardless of nominal multinational character. 2. Intelligence fusion capability investment. Dedicated funding would establish and maintain sophisticated intelligence integration, enabling comprehensive awareness through information fusion beyond individual national collection limitations or analysis biases. This collective approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities within its own intelligence services, where integration funding proved essential for comprehensive assessment beyond merely maintaining separate capabilities, frequently creating partial understanding or contradictory conclusions without dedicated fusion resources regardless of individual collection excellence. 3. Rapid reaction force establishment. Common budgets would finance dedicated multinational rapid reaction capabilities, enabling immediate crisis response through prepositioned resources beyond individual national authorization delays or capability limitations. This collective approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing rapid response capabilities within its own forces, where dedicated funding proved essential for genuine readiness beyond merely designating existing forces without specific resource allocation, frequently creating response gaps despite theoretical capability designation. 4. Strategic communication development. Dedicated funding would establish sophisticated strategic messaging capabilities, enabling consistent narrative management through professional communication beyond individual national public relations, frequently creating uncoordinated or contradictory messaging, undermining collective credibility. This common approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing strategic communication for security operations, where dedicated resources proved essential for effectiveness beyond merely coordinating separate national efforts, frequently creating message inconsistency despite coordination attempts. 5. Islamic heritage protection capability. Unique to this alliance, common budgets would finance specialized capabilities for sacred site security, cultural heritage preservation, and religious gathering protection beyond conventional military requirements or individual national responsibilities. This distinctive approach draws on Pakistan's recognition that Islamic identity creates special security requirements transcending purely conventional defense considerations, with religious site protection requiring dedicated capabilities beyond standard military forces regardless of general security excellence. This core capability common funding establishes genuine collective functions through dedicated resources rather than merely coordinating separate national capabilities, frequently creating gaps, overlaps, or inconsistency, undermining effectiveness. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing integrated capabilities within its joint forces, where dedicated common funding proved essential for genuine integration beyond merely designating separate capabilities without specific integration resources, frequently creating coordination challenges despite theoretical unity. The approach reflects Pakistan's understanding that effective multinational operations require dedicated common capabilities through specific resource allocation, establishing genuine collective functions beyond merely coordinating separate national elements, potentially creating performance gaps despite formal unification without dedicated common resources. Transparent budget governance implementation. Effective common funding requires sophisticated governance, ensuring both appropriate resource utilization and member confidence through transparent management. 1. Multi-level oversight structure. Budget governance would implement multiple supervision layers, including technical financial management, member state representation, and independent audit, creating comprehensive accountability beyond merely administrative execution without sufficient oversight. This layered approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing oversight for its own defense expenditure, where multiple accountability levels proved essential for maintaining both effective resource utilization and stakeholder confidence, particularly regarding complex programs involving sophisticated substantial monitoring compliance verification. 2. Beyond resources merely requiring procedural Decision authority distribution. Governance structures would establish graduated decision thresholds assigning different approval authorities based on expenditure size, program sensitivity, and strategic significance rather than uniform processes regardless of decision importance. This nuanced approach draws on Pakistan's experience managing defense resource decisions, where differentiated procedures proved more effective than uniform processes inappropriate for either routine administrative matters requiring excessive review or major strategic decisions receiving insufficient consideration despite vastly different significance and consequence potential. 3. Transparency without compromise. Governance would implement sophisticated information sharing balancing member oversight requirements against operational security concerns through appropriate classification, compartmentation, and access control rather than binary choices between complete transparency potentially compromising sensitive capabilities or excessive secrecy undermining member confidence. This balanced approach draws on Pakistan's experience managing its own strategic programs, where calibrated transparency proved essential for maintaining both necessary security and appropriate oversight, avoiding both excessive disclosure creating vulnerability and unnecessary secrecy potentially creating suspicion or mismanagement opportunity. 4. Resource utilization efficiency emphasis. Governance would emphasize outcome performance beyond merely procedural compliance through systematic evaluation assessing actual capability delivery against resource utilization rather than focusing exclusively on process adherence regardless of result effectiveness. This results-oriented approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing capabilities within severe resource constraints, where efficiency proved essential for security effectiveness requiring performance emphasis beyond merely procedural correctness frequently insufficient for ensuring optimal resource utilization despite formal compliance. Five. Islamic financial ethics integration. Unique to this alliance, budget governance would explicitly incorporate Islamic principles regarding financial stewardship, transparency obligation, and equitable resource management beyond merely technical procedures. This distinctive approach draws on religious concepts where resource management represents spiritual responsibility beyond purely administrative function, providing enhanced accountability motivation through theological foundation beyond merely procedural requirements alone regardless of religious significance in Muslim societies where Islamic principles directly impact. Perceived legitimacy beyond purely technical governance regardless of procedural sophistication. This transparent budget governance implementation establishes effective resource management through sophisticated oversight balancing accountability against efficiency through multidimensional supervision rather than either excessive bureaucracy potentially paralyzing operations or insufficient oversight creating mismanagement vulnerability. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing governance for its own defense resources, where balanced oversight proved essential for maintaining both operational effectiveness and stakeholder confidence, particularly regarding sensitive capabilities requiring both appropriate security and sufficient accountability. The approach reflects Pakistan's understanding that alliance sustainability ultimately depends on member confidence in common resource management through transparent, efficient governance establishing clear accountability without unnecessary operational constraint, rather than either excessive control potentially undermining effectiveness or insufficient oversight potentially creating doubt regarding proper resource utilization regardless of actual management quality. Resource allocation prioritization. Beyond governance, effective common budgeting requires sophisticated prioritization ensuring resources address most critical requirements through structured decision processes. 1. Strategic alignment methodology. Allocation decisions would implement systematic alignment verification ensuring expenditure support core alliance objectives through explicit connection between funding requests and strategic priorities rather than disconnected technical or bureaucratic decisions without strategic context. This aligned approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar methodologies for its own defense budgeting, where strategic focus proved essential for maximizing security benefit from limited resources requiring deliberate prioritization beyond merely technical merit assessment or bureaucratic advocacy regardless of strategic importance. 2. Risk-based priority framework. Resource allocation would incorporate sophisticated risk assessment evaluating both probability and consequence severity, creating nuanced prioritization beyond merely technical requirements or capability desirability without threat context. This risk-informed approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar frameworks for its own security investment, where threat-based assessment proved essential for effective resource targeting, particularly when significant capability gaps exceeded available funding, requiring difficult choices between competing requirements despite inherent merit across multiple options. 3. Capability gap analysis integration. Prioritization would systematically identify and assess capability shortfalls through comprehensive gap analysis, comparing requirements against existing capabilities, creating evidence-based decision foundation beyond merely subjective judgment or internal advocacy effectiveness regardless of actual need significance. This analytical approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar methodology for its own force development, where gap analysis proved essential for identifying critical requirements beyond merely perceived deficiencies, potentially reflecting institutional preferences rather than genuine operational necessities regardless of advocacy sophistication. 4. Return on investment assessment. Resource allocation would incorporate systematic benefit evaluation, comparing expected security enhancement against required investment, creating efficiency-based prioritization beyond merely technical desirability without cost-benefit consideration. This value-focused approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing capabilities within severe resource constraints, where investment return assessment proved essential for maximizing security benefit from limited funding, requiring careful evaluation beyond merely capability desirability regardless of resource efficiency or alternative benefit potential from equivalent investment in different capabilities. 5. Islamic priority principle integration. Unique to this alliance, resource allocation would explicitly incorporate Islamic concepts regarding necessity prioritization, essential protection requirements, and proportional preparation beyond merely technical or bureaucratic considerations. This distinctive approach draws on religious principles, where security investment represents spiritual obligation, requiring appropriate prioritization beyond merely organizational preference, providing enhanced legitimacy through religious foundation, particularly regarding sensitive allocation decisions, potentially creating disagreement without clear principled foundation beyond merely technical assessment or organizational advocacy. This resource allocation prioritization establishes effective investment targeting through sophisticated methodology, ensuring resources address most critical requirements rather than merely responding to strongest advocacy, institutional preference, or subjective judgment without structured analysis. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing prioritization approaches within severe resource constraints, where systematic methodology proved essential for maximizing security benefit from limited funding, particularly when available resources could not address all identified requirements despite inherent merit across multiple competing needs. The approach reflects Pakistan's understanding that effective security investment requires rigorous prioritization through structured methodology, establishing clear relationship between allocation decisions and strategic requirements rather than subjective or ad hoc decision processes, potentially creating suboptimal resource utilization through misalignment between actual security needs and funding allocation, regardless of total resource availability. Infrastructure investment coordination. Beyond operating budgets, effective collective security requires coordinated infrastructure development, enabling capability integration through physical foundations aligned with strategic requirements. Strategic basing network development. The alliance would implement comprehensive basing infrastructure supporting collective capabilities through coordinated development. 1. Geographic coverage optimization. Infrastructure development would establish strategic facility distribution, providing appropriate capability positioning through systematic coverage analysis rather than merely historical basing patterns or individual national preferences without collective perspective. This optimized approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing its own military infrastructure, where location optimization proved essential for effective capability Employment, particularly regarding rapid response requirements necessitating appropriate geographic positioning beyond merely convenient or traditional locations regardless of current strategic environment. 2. Functional specialization implementation. Rather than duplicate capabilities across all facilities, infrastructure development would establish specialized functions at different locations according to comparative advantage, local conditions, and strategic requirements, creating efficient network beyond generic bases with identical capabilities regardless of specific needs. This specialized approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing focused capabilities within its own infrastructure, where functional specialization proved more effective than attempting comprehensive development at every location despite resource limitations preventing genuine full-spectrum capability across multiple sites regardless of efficiency or necessity considerations. 3. Host nation integration enhancement. Infrastructure development would incorporate sophisticated host nation relationship management through formal agreements, local benefit provision, and appropriate sovereignty respect, creating sustainable presence beyond merely technical facility establishment without sufficient political foundation. This integrated approach draws on Pakistan's experience hosting international security elements, where relationship quality frequently proved more important than physical infrastructure for sustainable presence, particularly when controversial operations created local opposition, potentially undermining otherwise excellent facilities without sufficient political acceptance regardless of technical sophistication. 4. Resilience and redundancy balance. Infrastructure design would incorporate appropriate system redundancy, geographic dispersion, and hardening measures, providing necessary resilience without excessive duplication through systematic vulnerability assessment and mitigation prioritization. This balanced approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing survivable infrastructure for its strategic forces, where calculated redundancy proved essential for mission assurance while excessive duplication potentially wasted limited resources without proportional security enhancement, requiring careful balance between resilience requirements and resource efficiency beyond merely maximizing hardening regardless of cost-benefit relationship. 5. Islamic land use principles. Unique to this alliance, infrastructure development would incorporate Islamic principles regarding land stewardship, environmental protection, and community impact beyond merely technical requirements or military utility without ethical consideration. This distinctive approach draws on religious concepts where development represents spiritual responsibility requiring ethical consideration beyond merely capability enhancement, providing enhanced legitimacy through religious foundation, particularly within local communities where facility acceptance frequently depends on perceived ethical development beyond merely military utility regardless of technical sophistication or security benefit. This strategic basing network development establishes appropriate physical foundations through coordinated infrastructure aligned with collective requirements rather than merely individual national development, potentially creating gaps, overlaps, or misalignment undermining overall effectiveness. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing military infrastructure within both resource constraints and challenging security environments, where strategic optimization proved essential for maximizing capability employment from limited facilities, particularly when threat location, response timelines, and political acceptability created complex requirements beyond merely technical development. The approach reflects Pakistan's understanding that effective security infrastructure requires deliberate network design through comprehensive planning, establishing clear relationship between physical development and strategic requirements rather than incremental or uncoordinated growth, potentially creating suboptimal positioning, unnecessary duplication, or critical gaps regardless of individual facility quality. Transportation network integration. Beyond fixed facilities, effective infrastructure requires comprehensive transportation, enabling force mobility through coordinated network development. 1. Strategic mobility corridor establishment. Infrastructure development would identify and enhance critical transportation routes connecting separate alliance territories through dedicated investment, access agreements, and security arrangements, creating reliable mobility beyond merely commercial networks potentially unavailable during crises. This dedicated approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for its own forces, where designated military corridors proved essential for reliable movement, particularly during regional tensions when commercial routes frequently faced restrictions, congestion, or security challenges potentially preventing critical force movement despite theoretical connectivity through standard transportation networks. 2. Intermodal transfer hub development. Rather than separate transport modes, infrastructure would establish specialized transfer facilities enabling seamless transition between air, ground, and maritime transportation through coordinated development, creating efficient movement beyond single-mode networks with limited integration. This connected approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities within its own logistics system, where transfer efficiency frequently proved decisive for rapid deployment, particularly during complex operations requiring multiple transportation modes across challenging geography, creating connection requirements beyond single-system movement regardless of individual mode capability. Three. Host nation access agreement formalization. Beyond physical infrastructure, transportation networks would establish comprehensive legal frameworks governing movement rights, customs procedures, and regulatory compliance through formal agreements, creating reliable access beyond merely physical capability without sufficient legal foundation. This comprehensive approach draws on Pakistan's experience managing international force movement, where legal arrangements frequently proved as important as physical infrastructure for effective transportation, particularly regarding sovereignty-sensitive border crossings, airspace access, and territorial movement, potentially facing regulatory obstacles despite physical capability without appropriate legal frameworks regardless of technical transportation capacity. 4. Critical infrastructure choke point development. Security would enhancement identify potential transportation bottlenecks through systematic vulnerability assessment, implementing appropriate alternative routing, capacity enhancement, or security measures ensuring network reliability beyond merely theoretical connectivity vulnerable to single-point disruption. This resilience approach draws on Pakistan's experience securing its own strategic transportation routes, where choke point protection proved essential for movement assurance, particularly when adversaries specifically targeted critical transportation nodes, creating vulnerability beyond merely general route security regardless of overall network capacity. 5. Islamic transportation ethics integration. Unique to this alliance, network development would incorporate Islamic principles regarding traveler rights, environmental responsibility, and community impact beyond merely military utility without ethical consideration. This distinctive approach draws on religious concepts where transportation development represents spiritual responsibility requiring appropriate ethical standards beyond merely military efficiency, providing enhanced legitimacy through religious foundation, particularly regarding routes through populated areas where community acceptance frequently depends on perceived ethical operation beyond merely movement capability regardless of technical sophistication. This transportation network integration establishes comprehensive mobility capability through coordinated development addressing both physical infrastructure and enabling agreements rather than merely separate national systems, potentially creating movement barriers between supposedly unified forces. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing military transportation capabilities across challenging geography, where integrated planning proved essential for effective movement, particularly during complex operations requiring multiple transportation modes, international border crossings, and operation in contested environments, creating requirements beyond merely commercial transportation adaptation without specific military consideration. The approach reflects Pakistan's understanding that effective military mobility requires dedicated network development through comprehensive planning, establishing reliable movement capability under crisis conditions rather than merely assuming commercial transportation availability, potentially creating critical vulnerabilities during precisely those high-tension situations when military movement becomes most essential regardless of peacetime adequacy. Communication infrastructure development. Effective alliance operations require sophisticated communication infrastructure enabling command integration through reliable connectivity across diverse environments. 1. Multilayer communication network establishment. Infrastructure development would implement multiple complementary systems including satellite, terrestrial, and tactical communications through integrated design, creating resilient connectivity beyond single system networks vulnerable to technological failure, enemy action, or environmental disruption. This redundant approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for its own forces, where layered communications proved essential for command continuity, particularly during high-intensity operations where adversaries specifically targeted communication systems, creating vulnerability beyond merely normal reliability concerns regardless of individual system sophistication. 2. Secure transmission infrastructure implementation. Rather than merely commercial standards, communication development would establish military-grade security through encrypted transmission paths, protected facilities, and cyber defense integration, creating genuinely secure connectivity beyond civilian networks potentially vulnerable to sophisticated adversary collection. This security-focused approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing protected communications for its strategic forces, where transmission security proved essential for effective command, particularly regarding sensitive capabilities where compromise potentially created catastrophic consequences beyond merely operational inconvenience regardless of transmission efficiency or convenience. 3. Interoperability infrastructure enhancement investment. Development would establish technical compatibility between different national systems through interface standardization, protocol harmonization, and gateway implementation, creating functional multinational communication beyond merely parallel national networks with limited cross-connection. This integrated approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities within its joint forces, where system compatibility proved essential for effective multinational operations, particularly during complex scenarios requiring rapid coordination across different service components, potentially using diverse equipment types, creating connection challenges beyond merely theoretical network existence without practical interoperability regardless of individual system capability. 4. Mobile command capability development. Beyond fixed infrastructure, communication development would establish sophisticated mobile systems enabling command continuity during movement, after fixed facility damage, or during deliberate dispersal, creating operational flexibility beyond stationary networks, potentially creating vulnerability through predictable location. This mobility approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar capabilities for its own forces, where movement capability proved essential for command survivability, particularly when adversaries specifically targeted known headquarters locations, creating vulnerability beyond merely normal reliability concerns regarding fixed facilities regardless of hardening or protection measures. 5. Islamic communication ethics integration. Unique to this alliance, infrastructure development would incorporate Islamic principles regarding privacy protection, information integrity, and communication responsibility beyond merely technical requirements without ethical consideration. This distinctive approach draws on religious concepts where communication represents spiritual responsibility, requiring appropriate ethical standards beyond merely technical efficiency, providing enhanced legitimacy through religious foundation, particularly regarding intelligence and surveillance capabilities where ethical operation proves essential for maintaining moral authority beyond merely technical capability regardless of operational utility. This communication infrastructure development establishes reliable command connectivity through sophisticated systems, enabling effective multinational operations across diverse environments rather than merely parallel national networks with limited integration, potentially creating coordination failure during complex operations. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing military communications within challenging security environments where integrated Planning proved essential for effective command, particularly during high-intensity operations requiring reliable connectivity despite adversary disruption attempts, challenging geography, and diverse equipment types, creating requirements beyond merely commercial communication adaptation without specific military consideration. The approach reflects Pakistan's understanding that effective command ultimately depends on reliable communication through resilient infrastructure, establishing dependable connectivity under contested conditions rather than merely assuming normal function during precisely those disrupted situations when command communication becomes most essential regardless of peacetime adequacy. Research, mechanisms, and development funding. Beyond current capabilities, sustained security requires continuous advancement through coordinated research investment, allocating limited resources toward critical innovation through structured mechanisms. Collaborative research program establishment. The alliance would implement sophisticated collaboration, enabling more effective innovation through coordinated rather than duplicative research. 1. Joint research priority identification. Collaborative mechanisms would establish common research agendas through systematic requirements analysis, capability gap assessment, and technological opportunity evaluation, creating focused investment beyond uncoordinated national efforts, potentially duplicating work while leaving other areas unexplored. This coordinated approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing research priorities within resource constraints, where focused effort proved essential for meaningful advancement, particularly regarding complex capabilities requiring substantial investment beyond individual project scale, potentially achievable within limited national budgets regardless of technical merit across numerous competing proposals. 2. Distributed Excellence Center network. Rather than centralized facilities, research infrastructure would establish specialized centers across different member states according to existing expertise, facilities, and comparative advantage, creating efficient network beyond duplicate generic centers without sufficient specialization depth. This distributed approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing focused research excellence within its defense establishment, where specialization proved more effective than attempting comprehensive capability beyond resource capacity, particularly regarding advanced technologies requiring significant expertise depth beyond generalist knowledge regardless of facility quality or equipment availability without necessary human capital concentration. 3. Multinational team integration. Beyond merely parallel national efforts, research programs would establish genuinely integrated teams combining personnel from different member states through collaborative projects, exchange programs, and joint facilities, creating cross-pollination beyond isolated national approaches, potentially missing synergistic opportunities. This integrated approach draws on Pakistan's experience participating in similar collaborative efforts with key partners, where multinational teams frequently generated innovative solutions beyond individual national capabilities, particularly regarding complex challenges, benefiting from diverse perspectives potentially unavailable within single national traditions regardless of individual expertise quality. 4. Industry-academia military linkage. Research programs would establish structured collaboration between defense industries, academic institutions, and military organizations through formal mechanisms including joint projects, personnel exchanges, and coordinated funding, creating comprehensive innovation ecosystem beyond isolated sectors with limited interaction. This connected approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar linkages within its own research establishment, where cross-sector collaboration frequently accelerated capability development, particularly regarding technologies requiring diverse expertise types potentially distributed across different organizational types regardless of individual sector excellence without sufficient cross-fertilization. 5. Islamic scientific legacy restoration. Unique to this alliance, research programs would explicitly connect contemporary innovation with historical Islamic scientific excellence through dedicated initiatives exploring this intellectual heritage for relevant insights, approaches, and foundations beyond merely modern Western paradigms without historical context. This distinctive approach draws on the rich Islamic scientific tradition that previously led global innovation across numerous fields including mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and chemistry, potentially providing unique perspectives beyond conventional approaches while simultaneously restoring intellectual pride among Muslim scientists, potentially enhancing motivation beyond merely technical objectives regardless of immediate practical application. This collaborative research program establishment creates more effective innovation through coordinated investment leveraging diverse expertise across member states rather than parallel national efforts, potentially creating inefficient duplication while leaving critical areas unexplored. The implementation draws on Pakistan's experience developing research capabilities within resource constraints, where focused collaboration proved essential for meaningful advancement, particularly regarding complex technologies requiring substantial investment and diverse expertise beyond individual national capacity regardless of commitment level without sufficient coordination. The approach reflects Pakistan's understanding that effective security innovation requires deliberate collaboration through structured mechanisms establishing clear relationship between research investment and strategic requirements rather than uncoordinated efforts, potentially creating wasteful duplication. Subscale projects, or critical capability gaps regardless of total resource allocation without sufficient strategic alignment. Tiered investment framework implementation. Beyond collaboration structure, effective research requires sophisticated investment allocation targeting resources according to strategic impact potential. 1. Would strategic impact classification system, research funding implement systematic classification categorizing potential projects according to security impact potential, technical feasibility, and resource requirements, creating structured prioritization beyond ad hoc judgment or institutional advocacy without strategic assessment. This systematic approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar frameworks for its own research investment, where impact assessment proved essential for effective resource targeting, particularly when available funding could not address all worthy proposals, requiring difficult choices between competing requirements despite inherent merit across multiple options. 2. Breakthrough technology focus initiatives. Beyond incremental improvement, dedicated funding would target potentially transformative technologies through specialized high-risk, high-reward programs, accepting greater uncertainty for revolutionary potential, creating innovation diversity beyond merely conservative projects with predictable but limited outcomes. This balanced approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar initiatives within its strategic programs, where breakthrough investment sometimes produced capabilities with disproportionate strategic impact despite higher failure rates, particularly regarding technologies offering asymmetric advantages, potentially offsetting conventional disadvantages regardless of development risk compared with more predictable but less transformative alternatives. Three. Technology readiness level progression framework. Investment would implement structured development pathways, moving promising concepts from early research through progressive maturation phases with appropriate funding levels, oversight requirements, and evaluation criteria at each stage, creating systematic advancement beyond disjointed efforts frequently failing during transition between concept and application regardless of technical promise. This methodical approach draws on Pakistan's experience developing similar frameworks for its own capability development, where structured progression proved essential for successful technology transition, particularly regarding complex systems requiring multiple development stages beyond merely promising research without systematic application pathway regardless of concept quality without sufficient maturation support. For asymmetric advantage identification, investment prioritization would specifically identify technologies offering disproportionate strategic benefit despite modest resource requirements through systematic assessment of leverage potential, adversary vulnerability, and implementation feasibility, creating efficient impact beyond merely impressive technologies without strategic context. This focused approach draws on Pakistan's extensive experience developing asymmetric capabilities against numerically superior adversaries, where targeted investment in high-leverage technologies frequently provided strategic advantage despite resource constraints, particularly regarding capabilities exploiting specific adversary vulnerabilities, potentially creating disproportionate impact regardless of absolute investment scale compared with more resource-intensive but less strategically targeted alternatives. 5. Islamic scientific ethics integration. Unique to this alliance, research funding would incorporate explicit ethical guidelines derived from Islamic principles regarding legit. Chapter 81. Defense Industrial Cooperation. And make ready against them all you can of power, including steeds of war, to threaten the enemy of Allah and your enemy, and others besides whom you may not know but whom Allah does know. Quran 8 hours 60 minutes. The establishment of sustainable defense expenditure mechanisms creates essential financial foundation for the Muslim security architecture, yet resources alone cannot produce capability without industrial capacity, transforming funding into actual systems, equipment, and technologies. This chapter examines how the alliance would implement comprehensive defense industrial cooperation through production sharing protocols, joint arrangements, venture technology transfer structures, export control harmonization, and intellectual property protection. The Quranic injunction to make ready all you can of power finds practical manifestation in industrial capability, where preparation becomes tangible through manufacturing capacity rather than merely financial allocation. This chapter examines how Pakistan would lead the alliance's defense industrial cooperation, applying both Islamic principles of self-reliance and modern industrial methodologies to create manufacturing capabilities that address the Muslim world's critical security requirements through collaborative production rather than perpetual foreign dependency. Production. Implementation. Sharing arrangements. The foundation of sustainable defense industrial cooperation lies in sophisticated production sharing, enabling more effective manufacturing through complementary capabilities rather than duplicative national efforts. Comparative advantage mapping and allocation. The alliance would implement systematic assessment, identifying industrial strengths across member states as foundation for specialized production assignment. 1. Industrial capability assessment. Comprehensive evaluation would catalog existing manufacturing capabilities across member states, including facility sophistication, workforce expertise, quality assurance systems, and production capacity, creating accurate understanding beyond merely declared capabilities or aspirational claims without verification. This evidence-based approach draws on Pakistan's experience conducting similar assessment within its own defense industry, where realistic capability evaluation proved essential for effective planning, particularly regarding complex and security considerations, creating efficient manufacturing networks beyond merely political allocation without technical consideration. This analytical approach draws on Pakistan's experience optimizing production within its own defense manufacturing, where value chain analysis proved essential for efficiency, particularly regarding complex systems involving multiple components potentially produced across different facilities, requiring careful integration planning beyond merely separate manufacturing without coordination consideration. For complementary production framework, rather than identical capabilities across members, industrial cooperation would emphasize complementary manufacturing, creating collaborative production networks where different national